Good afternoon. I am Kay Fields. I'm sure you all know that. I am the vice chair of the school district, of the school board, and Ms. Cunningham is being delayed today, so I am acting in her stead. And we're very happy to see everybody today. Hope you all had a great Labor Day weekend. And now I would like to turn the work session over to Superintendent Hyatt.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, members of staff, and community members. Thank you for being here today. At this time, we will begin. So first and foremost, during the workshop today, first topic up is legislative agenda. So I'd like to ask Ms. Dodge to come forward. And for our presenters today, you can either control the presentation from the mouse over here, or I can control it here, or I can give you the clicker altogether.
As a confirmed control freak, I'll go ahead and do it myself. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? I hope you had an opportunity to review the proposed. This is a draft agenda that's based on input I've received from board members, Mr. Hyde and staff. Because it's a draft, I'm happy to entertain any additional issues that you would like to discuss or add or modify to the legislative priorities. So are there any questions?
So I listed the statewide priorities if you want to review them, Ms. Dodge.
I'm sorry?
I listed them. I pulled up the slide for you, the statewide priorities.
There we go. Okay. So do you want to focus on the statewide priorities? Are there any questions or comments?
I know I saw Ms. Miller's hand go up, and I believe Ms. Fields' hand is up as well.
I wish I had the slide. It's easier to see here than there, but I appreciate us doing this early because they're about to go into committees and start working way ahead of time, and I feel like in the past we've kind of gotten to it a little bit later just from things developing and stuff happening. We've talked about a recent issue, and I don't know that it needs to be a statewide priority, but what we've done with the access rule change for students with significant developmental disabilities not at this time allowed to have modifications to curriculum in kindergarten. Is that something that you feel we should put as a priority, or is that something that we should see elsewhere? I'm just looking for your input.
So that is right now a regulatory issue. It's not really a legislative issue. I plan to certainly bring it to the attention of our legislative delegation to see if we can get some assistance in finding out more information from the department as to what their plans are, kind of what their background was for making the changes. But I don't, at this time, really see an option for it to be. We could maybe make it a targeted priority, but because it was a rule change and not a statute change, it's kind of limited as far as the legislative platform is concerned.
Is it common for rule changes to be made without our delegation being aware of those? Because I was shocked that changing curriculum for K1 and 2 and no one outside of the DOE and our ESE staff knew it happened.
It's not unusual. You know, the department is constantly going through rule promulgation, and so it's hard for our staff to keep up on what's going on, let alone members of our legislative delegation. So it's not unusual. This one, I'm going to probably turn this over to Dr. Lutz. This one is unusual in that it wasn't really a noticed rule change. What they're doing is daggering, what they call daggering courses, which doesn't have the same process as maybe a rule promulgation would.
I can provide the board with a little more context. The initial rule change was to dagger all access points courses in kindergarten through second grade. That came to us on July 14th. So we had to quickly pivot, there's our favorite word again, to do that. And then just last week, I assume, due to feedback and pressure from external groups, they reversed course on grades 1 and 2 and are now allowing our access points curriculum for grades 1 and 2. Still has not solved the issue for kindergarten students. Right now, our curriculum that we use for access points is unique learning systems. They are quickly and actively trying to reverse engineer their curriculum so that it meets kindergarten best standards. So that because that curriculum does allow for movement between one of 4 levels. However, the movement is considered a modification to the curriculum, which is prohibited by this rule. Whereas it could be, if it was an accommodation instead of a modification, we could do that. But the end result is we will have some kindergarten students that we need to continue to advocate for to be in the least restrictive environment where their needs can be met. Because we have unfortunately, some kindergarten students who are in need of maximum level of services.
I think the best way to help explain that is we have kids coming out of Achievement Academy and our pre-K ESE programs that will be allowed 0 modifications.
Correct.
Including PE, so no adaptive PE, which is a liability that I'm sharing with Wes. So the external pressure, yes, it's been applied heavily, so I hope it changes that way. I just was shocked that, I understand rule changes and challenge to rules that have no part, the legislators don't have a say in, but I thought there was some mechanism to inform them that, because they're going to hear from their community and they don't know. But anyways, thank you for this. I think we made progress in the last legislative priorities that we had. I think the movement to change the delivery of the grades to have the date before, which they were originally doing, I think was helpful. So I'm going to yield my time to Ms. Fields because I think we've made progress, and I agree with what we're doing here.
Thank you.
Ms. Fields?
Thank you. So I reviewed the current legislative priorities, and my question is, why are we not continuing to have the first item on the platform, which deals with the implementation of COVID-related schools, due to the varied implementation of COVID-related school openings and closings, as well as school and classroom quarantines, allow Florida Standards Assessment scores from the current year to be used to establish a revised baseline for school grades with no district or school grades or VAM scores calculated. It might need to be revised a little bit, but I still think that that's relevant. I don't see that on
So
here.
the first item under the statewide priorities is where we attempted to modify that and capture what we thought was more appropriate for the upcoming school year. Last year, we had e-learning, we had a lot of different things going on. This year, we are full-on in-person learning. And so we tried to encapsulate the fact that quarantining and those types of things are still impacting our students in our classrooms, which is why we've asked for to retain the ability to opt into school grades because of the fluidity, the lack of continuity in instruction for a lot of our students. The other portions of last year were more targeted to what was happening with funding and to with e-learning. And so if you would like to expand number 1, I'd be happy to, have that discussion.
I think we need to expand it to make sure that we're encompassing everything that is relevant. This is a different kind of year, which leads me to my next item, provide e-learning funding for students who are quarantined. We don't have funding for students that are quarantined, and correct me, Superintendent Hyde, if I am wrong. And I don't see that here. Maybe it's here somewhere, but I don't see it. And we are having a serious issue. Everybody knows that, with a lot of our students being quarantined. I've heard from a lot of parents, even from teachers, basically saying that when the kids are quarantined, a lot of them are getting nothing. They're getting no learning. And that is not what we are about, or should be about. So I don't know how you lobby for that. I know it's very touchy of coming from the state level, but at the end of the day, we're supposed to make sure that our kids get a quality education.
So you said you want, I missed part of it in the middle about
Provide
funding.
e-learning funding for students who are quarantined.
Okay.
I don't know if
Continued
that's not
funding?
correct.
So let me go ahead and address and provide some clarification. So we do have ESSER dollars that we currently provide to support our students in the use of technology and access points, inclusive of hotspots and other devices. We have converted several of our buses. We can also contract with local providers, because we have several network providers throughout our community that can each provide students with access. At the beginning of the school year, part of our MOU with PEA outlined 4 options for families and students to participate and engage in learning. Our teachers have been incentivized to allow students to join class remotely where applicable, where appropriate. And there are some classes, as you would understand, like an autos class, where a student joining the class as if they're working on brakes doesn't really serve a purpose. That student might get an alternate assignment. So we do provide some of that. In addition to that, between our large grant submission, we are allocating close to $17 million towards additional devices and supports for e-learning. The problem we currently face is, outside of quarantine, there is no remote option authorized by the state of Florida. When the governor's mandate expired, they did not extend remote learning as a viable option for families who didn't want to be in person at all. So we do have options for students who are currently quarantined. If families are expressing a concern, if you would relay those through my office, we'd be more than happy to have Dr. Barrios and her team provide that assistance to those families directly.
So you're basically saying that currently there is no issue with kids not being able to get their learning at home while they're being quarantined?
We have resources in place at all of our schools to address that. There are a handful of our schools, based off the lack of community infrastructure, where some of our communities, even with a hotspot, it may still be difficult for them, but that's why we could actually provide and pay for the monthly cost for Wi-Fi connectivity in those homes if we need to.
Well, I'm glad that there are some that's getting it, and there are some that's not. I'd be happy to give you the names of the
Yes, ma'am.
schools, and maybe we can find out why.
Yes, ma'am.
Some are
Dr.
getting
Barrios?
it and some are not. And then the last thing that I have is to hold the district harmless that have seen a decrease in enrollment for the 21-22 school year. I'm sure that that is a concern. It should be a concern
Yes, ma'am.
with the way things are going, and I don't see that on here as well. And maybe I'm missing it.
Yes, ma'am. And that's, again, today's presentation was to provide a summary of what we have captured to date and get feedback from the board so that we can make sure it's inclusive of all of our interests. Ms. Reynolds?
Thank you. Our FSBA advocacy call 2 weeks ago, as part of number 1, the topics from throughout the state seem to also include the holding harmless for number of students for the decrease, and also doing something similar to what they did with days last year, that as long as you had the hours, the days were not necessary if we had to quarantine a school or something like that for 2 days or shut down for a deep clean, anything along those lines. But that all seemed to be included under number 1 for most other districts, so it may be good for us to align ours to there. FSBA's advocacy legislative platform meeting is the 13th, I believe. So it may even be helpful if our language aligns to what FSBA is, because that's what other districts in the state, if we're all singing the same tune, seems to be a little bit more helpful. So once that is presented, you'll all get a copy.
Okay. Second slide were our county or our specific school district priorities.
Are there any questions or comments?
Ms. Miller?
Can you talk a little bit about number 2? Because we've had the conversation about the millage, and then there was something done this year that was a replacement. I don't know what you want to call what happened, where we thought it looked one way, and then at the end it was different. So can you talk about what number 2 would mean?
Right, so the issue that we spoke about earlier was about annually when the tax collectors submit the amount of money that a county is going to collect on their school district RLE. In the budget, when it is passed, on the day that it's passed, each school district has a number that they have to hit for that RLE number. So for 20 years, we've always been about at or under that number, and our adjustment would be very small, upwards. And the richer districts generally tend to bring in more than the number that they have to hit for the RLE, and so theirs would be adjusted annually to roll back. This is the first year we've been above our number, and it's the first time that we saw that small rollback. That happens every year. It's an annual adjustment that is part of the statute, but it's explained in there because you're not collecting an amount. You have when you build a budget, you have a number you have to hit. And so they don't want us to go above or below that number, and so they make very small adjustments to each individual county's RLE on an annual basis to make sure that you hit that number. And it's not huge. So that was what we were dealing with a couple months ago. What we're talking about here with the discretionary millage supplement, right now, that is an additional pot of money that certain districts get if they are below the average per student in the state. And so last year, I believe we received a little over $5 million that allowed us to get up towards the average. It doesn't get you to average, but it gets you towards the average. And so if we could apply that same factor to the RLE, you know, right now there's like a $1,800, $1,900 dollar difference between the highest funded per student and the lowest funded per student. And so what we're asking for is an opportunity to take a look at modifying the RLE so that we can get closer to that actual average, or wouldn't it be nice to even be above it?
Right.
To be over average for once, instead of always being on the lowest, you know, right, we've been lowest 10, bottom funded for the past forever. So that's what that is about. There's about 3 different issues that are related to millage.
Thank you.
Dr. Allen?
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde and Wendy Dodge. Thank you for presenting these to us. I would probably go back to Ms. Fields and some of her comments in regards to the statewide as it relates to number 1. And I could definitely, connect with that frustration that you're feeling there, because we are hearing some of those things as well. I think the connection for me as it relates to what you're saying, Ms. Fields, what's being presented here, is that executive order that notes that if a student goes on quarantine, we can count them as present if they're being given work in a sense. I'm not sure what that EO number was. So I'm just hoping that, we're not taking advantage of that EO in a sense. And I don't know if that EO would have an expiration date on it as well. But I think we definitely want to protect, because we have such a large number of students that have gone into quarantine. And then what that standard looks like in regards to when they're away. Are they meeting that standard of what they would be experiencing in the classroom? Well, and that's a bigger conversation. And I think, we've definitely can look last year and see the learning loss. And again, that hasn't been addressed from a press standpoint except within one article. And I think that should be what we're really, really thinking about is the success of our students as it relates to quarantine, because that's a big issue at this point. So I appreciate Ms. Fields on that. And I don't know if that, number one, if it captures that, but I mean, we recognize that it's disrupting that instructional continuity. So I think those 3 words for me really point to the issue that we're faced. So, and then in regards to the Polk priorities, just want to talk about number 3 here. This one, I really appreciate this one being on there. 6.7 is our average dropout rates. And if you think about that in the context of compound interest, is how I've been pondering that one, and what that compound interest negatively could have and has had on our community over years. And to see where we were in regards to, graduation rates years ago, and, obviously the progress that we made, but still 6.7% can have lasting impact. So if we look at, 2014 is when the GED made those changes. So in the mix of that, not only did they increase the fee of the a GED, but they also put it in only a computer-based platform. So they eliminated the paper-based. So, you know, I see some opportunities here, and number 3, to really better our community in a sense. I think there's been about 23 states that have adopted some options. And I think with Florida being such a pro-choice state for parents and students, this is one area that has not had a lot of choices and could have had could have a detrimental impact on our students and their life and livelihood. So, thank you.
Mr. Wilson? Mr. Wilson?
I just want to thank you for number 3. You and I have had some conversations about that, and, you know, it's a frustration of mine that we continue to focus in the state of Florida on pushing students into college. Now, I believe that anybody who wants to go to college should have that opportunity and have all the possible resources, but we have an inordinate number of students in our classrooms that have no interest in college, and we really don't have a viable option for them. I know we have our workforce programs, but still, it requires that general core competency instead of a more focused approach in allowing them to get certificates that will allow them to go to work, you know, and frankly, in this environment, as early as 16 if they wanted to, I think. We have a community college system, it's a state college system now that remediates students. So if they get out into the workplace and they realize they want to go back to college, that door is always open to them in the state of Florida. So I appreciate that because I think we need another option for those students who don't want to be in the classroom every single day and they resent being there, and we see that in so many different ways. And if we had options for those students and said, look, we're going to give you an opportunity to get a certificate that says you're ready to go to work right now. As soon as you get your certificate, you're ready to go to work. And those are good jobs. They're high-paying jobs. I was in a school building some time ago, I won't say where, and I heard a young man say, my dad is an electrician, and I want to be an electrician. And I heard the counselor say, no, you don't want to be an electrician. You want to go to college. He said, I don't want to go to college. I want to be an electrician. And I think that's the message we send every single day, and I think we need other options. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Ms. Miller?
I would like your opinion. We've talked about this over and over again, but what we had with a second diploma, there was so much work to get rid of it because it wasn't equivalent. And I don't know how many states have, if it's looked at as this is going to be an equivalent diploma, but how our DOE is currently running, where we're taking modifications away from kids and it's all about assessing, and we want to start assessing in pre-K. I'm a little concerned that this has good intention, but I don't know how much leeway you're going to be able to make even when our charters come, all of them are, everyone's going to college because that's the push from the state. I don't know that, in your opinion, are we going to make any kind of progress on offering some kind of, and what are other states doing? Do we have states that have viable, equal diplomas? Because what we don't want is another secondary diploma where you can't go to the military with it, you can't get a job with it. We've had that. And we were pushing kids into that shouldn't have been there. So that's the legislative pendulum swung and said no more secondary diplomas. So how will this look, and is there success with that Florida can look at around the country to duplicate?
My understanding is it's been implemented in, I'm going to go with half the states. In terms of it would be equal to the GED, not necessarily equal to a diploma. So if you think, slight differences.
Okay. But there'll be opportunities with it, like if it was a GED, a completed GED. So military, you could go into the military with this diploma, or similar.
I believe that, yes, the military does. The military does accept some of the ones that some of the states have implemented. I can't tell you that they accept every single one. That's not my area of expertise. But we would want to advocate for something that would open up every option for a student. If that's the track, if that's the way that this student would like to go, then we want to make sure that what is in place is going to give them the most options.
And I think the benchmarks need to be in place to where, since we are funded and graded based on test scores, that we want to give those opportunities, but we don't want to start making a pipeline to that with, supports or with other things in the community, the child could go to college. Like, that's going to be the gray area that's going to be hard to define, because we got in trouble in the past by shifting kids who were low performing or behavior risks into some kind of secondary option, and it came back to hurt us as a state. So I am all for this. I think this is a great idea. I think this would be the next step to academies, because then you wouldn't have the barrier of students who are lower performing or are struggling readers not being able to get into an academy because they have to take remedial reading for another 2 hours a day or an hour and a half a day. It would give them an opportunity to work towards some kind of certification. What will have to be ironed out in legislation is how you limit that program's being offered to, so you're not suppressing a whole group of students that could have higher expectations for all students, so those students could move on if that was their choice. So I look forward to seeing how this works out.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. And Ms. Miller brings up some very valid and relevant issues, but it's been my experience that the key is getting it on the priority list so that we can start the conversation. And then as the conversation unfolds, it tends to, those things tend to work out as we have those discussions later on. But I think it's important that we start that conversation. So I agree with Ms. Miller, but just getting it on there so we can get the conversation started, I think is most important.
Thank you. Dr. Allen?
Yeah, so just to, reiterate, there's, nationwide, there's only 3 of these exams that are recognized as high school equivalency. So I think put that in context as well. And it does become more that proprietary battle, right? Pearson being the proprietary that owns the GED, and then ETS would be the other testing service for the HITSEC. And I'm not sure of the third one. But, that's the big battle of, the lobbyists that are going to be advocating for that proprietary system. I just want to, thank Scott Turbyville, because he's the one that sort of brought this to my attention. He's leads the adult education at Lighthouse Ministries. But when we think about district-wide, and I'm not sure where all those touch points are within the district, but I'm sure Steve Cochran can let us know all those different touch points. But we think about the east area, the west area, that's servicing some of our adult students, the detention areas. So I think there's a lot of key areas specifically within the district that can be touched, but also even beyond that within our community. So I see some goodwill there and a broader perspective as well.
Ms. Fortney?
Thank you. Ms. Dodge, do you know of anything coming down the pike, possibility, anything you've heard that we might need to add to our priorities that maybe didn't pass last year, that could very well end up being a problem for us in the future?
Wow, on the spot.
I guess I could have warned you. I'm sorry, but I just thought of the question. So.
I think that we've discussed previously some of the IEP challenges with the choice bill that was passed last year. And based on my conversations with Dr. Lutz, I think that could put more pressure on that system with what's happening with the access points and the reevaluation of some of those students. Fiscally, the state, the LBC met last week, we're in good shape. The comments have been, we don't want to add a bunch of new programs, but we have enough money to continue Florida on a steady path without having to make huge cuts in those, which it's been a while since we've heard that. So that's nice to hear after having survived a pandemic. Other than that, I just think the other things that we're concerned about are what's going to happen with the impact of quarantining on our schools. I think that's going to be a fluid issue depending on, how long things last, whether they keep going the way they are right now, things level off, we'll have to see what happens. But
So I
off the
think
top of my head.
And there's also 2 other opportunities to answer your question. So as Ms. Reynolds pointed out, I think it's important we do have FSBA coming up. They'll have their legislative priorities in alignment. So there might be an opportunity for us to see something that maybe we weren't thinking of and we can lend our voice to. In addition, FADS has their upcoming retreat FAD's superintendents groups and their deputy superintendents will be getting together and having a similar conversation. So I believe we may be able to bring back some additional targeted priorities for the board here in the near future as we look to finalize this and move it forward. So appreciate the feedback today. Ms. Sarah Beth Reynolds.
I was just going to ask, will this be on our work session for the 28th?
Yes,
So
it
that we
will.
can, okay, thank you.
Ms. Miller.
I just had one other question. This might come up with FSBA or other groups. I'm concerned with FRS, and if they're going to look at that, we surely don't want to see any deductions or reduction of that system. It helps us recruit teachers. There's a lot of it there, and we have aging employees here that really look for us to help protect that. So I'm hoping it might come up again, but that's something that I would be interested in hearing what other organizations' opinions are on it.
Ms. Fields.
Thank you for adding the comment about FSBA, because I had said that to Ms. Dodge as well, that we needed to see what the FSBA might be proposing, and if it's something that relates to us and we can align with them, quite naturally, the more people that's working toward the same goal, the better. The other thing is, I would like to request that at some point in time in the very near future, that we have a detailed overview of what our e-learning is looking like for our students, so that our community can know exactly what we're doing and how we're handling the large amount of kids that are being quarantined and making sure that they're getting a quality education as best they can.
So, Ms. Fields, to that, it's a great question, or a great request. So there's two options for that. Or let me make two recommendations. Recommendation number one is my team and I will put together a video in English and in Spanish and try and get it also translated into Haitian Creole so we can post that video for families to see what options are available to them. But we will bring back, as part of the presentation on the 27th, a full summary. Because again, we have signed that, that's been an agreement, and that has been communicated to staff. But we probably could do a better job communicating it, conveying that to families. So there's two opportunities for us to
I like
ensure that
both
we're
of those.
messaging that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And so my last question is, what are we agreeing on today as it relates to the comments that we made? What are we going to have come back before us?
So what I heard from the board was that and from the superintendent, is that we're going to bring this back to work session again on the 28th. I will add some language regarding hold harmless for enrollment decreases and ensuring that we are allowed to use the day-to-hour equivalent this year to meet class, to meet the requirements for FTE and to meet the requirements for instructional hours and days that you need to complete in order to be promoted. And then I'll try to formulate something regarding FRS that would encapsulate Mrs. Miller's issue on protecting FRS and making sure there are no changes that impact our longtime employees.
And the FTE hold harmless was the last one I had on my list. So,
I thought
unless
I
missed-
said that, but
You
yeah,
may have,
hold
I missed
harmless
it.
for enrollment.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Ms. Reynolds.
In the past, not last year, but previously, we've met with our legislative delegation before session starts. Is that something we're planning to do this year, and what do we need to do to make sure that happens?
So the delegation meeting is in October. I want to say it's the 27th, 26th of October. I would have to double check that with you, but they've already sent out. They usually do that joint meeting in conjunction with their, public delegation meeting. I will reach out to, I believe Representative Burton's office is handling the delegation this year and see if that's, because they do it with the county commissioners and
Right.
usually in the past. And see if there's time and if there's, desire to do that. If not, Mr. Hyde has already, I'm going to say, touch base with we have 2 meetings left with members of the delegation, and then we will find a way to
Awesome.
make sure that we get you with them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Dodge. Next topic, Mr. Joseph McNaughton, our Chief Academic Officer, will address revisions, recommended revisions to the 21-22 student progression plan that are based off changes in statute.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, Board, Superintendent Hyde. Today I bring for you the proposed changes to the student progression plan. Many of the changes, you do have a handout of the changes that are in this year's student progression plan. Most have been discussed on the March 9th and the April 27th work sessions. There are 4 changes, and they're highlighted in your packet from State Board of Education rule changes or legislative updates. So I just want to go and take you through those. And the first one, thank you, is located on both page 22 and 51 of the student progression plan, or it's the 3rd page in the packet. And generally what it's talking about is for not this school year, but next school year, during the 22-23 school year, students who have been enrolled in an ESOL program for less than 2 years have met all their requirements for a standard high school diploma, except the passage of a must-pass state assessment or an alternative assessment, may meet the requirement to pass the statewide 10th grade English language arts assessment by demonstrating grade level expectations on a formative assessment. And again, this is a state Board of Education rule change. The next deals with we had to add some language because of Florida statute with the civics literacy requirements. There's 2 parts to this. The first part is students taking United States government will be required to take the assessment of civics literacy. And then students who earn a passing score of the civics literacy assessment in high school course will be exempt from the post-secondary civics literacy assessment. The final one is a change. The deleted language is students receiving 18 credit diploma are not eligible to be valedictorian or salutatorian. And the added language is to say that the 24 credit diploma or 18 credit diploma are eligible to be valedictorian or salutatorian. And the reason is that in the state they've changed the way the 18 credit diploma option is viewed. It is replaced by the 18 credit Excel diploma. And Excel stands for academically challenging curriculum to enhance learning. And so with this, the 18 credit Excel option and the 24 credit both are a standard diploma. And since they're both standard diplomas, the idea is to have they both have the option for valedictorian or salutatorian.
Any questions? Ms. Miller?
Just real quick, because sometimes we do get asked about civics and where it's taught. Can you just review our civics, the Florida, or the best standards for civics and what grades are taught in, so when this will be assessed, when this assessment takes place?
Okay, there's 2 different ones. There is the civics in middle school, which is taught in our 7th and 8th grade, and that is the end of course assessment. That is one of the requirements for middle school moving on to high school. And then this is the new civics literacy, which is a high school course, which will be in any American government will take this course, this civics assessment. Ms.
Reynolds?
Thank you. My question's actually on the page 33 change about homeschool advanced placement exams. Last year, with ACE exams, Florida Virtual has started adding ACE courses, and so they ran into some of these same issues with ACE. Is it possible to make this language about homeschool students taking exams apply to both AP and the ACE exams? They were just seeing students come that they don't offer a class at their school, yet they're getting asked to test students taking a different subject area. So just to make sure that they have, this is what the process is, may be helpful.
Yeah, we can take a
Does
look at
that
that.
make
We can
sense?
work with that and
Okay,
take a look at that.
thank you.
Ms. Fortney?
I have the whole document here, so I'm going to make reference to that. the very first page, I didn't want it to get printed. It says for all student. I don't know, on the actual cover page.
Okay.
And then on page 47, it's talking about the state university system. Just again, knowing, having taught high school, don't most four-year universities in our state university system require Algebra 2?
Required Algebra 2?
Yes, Algebra 1, Algebra 2 as the higher math?
No, that's not a requirement for that, for all majors. Now, if you're an engineering major, but
I just know that I had some kids not realize they needed Algebra 2, is my point, until they went to apply to a four-year university and they didn't have it. So I just wanted to know how we could have maybe addressed that, if possible. I don't know. And then on page 56, talking about the class rank, and this might be more for Superintendent Hyde. Are there other ways to class rank as far as between valedictorian, salutatorian, that type of thing?
There are other recognition programs.
Yes.
So for example, you have the cum laude system, you have other systems that capture students who fall within specified ranges, so that you could expand your recognition. Yes, ma'am?
Okay.
And I've seen systems that use both the cum laude and the val-sal program simultaneously,
Okay,
so that you can still offer that high level of achievement while still recognizing students. And there's a lot of valid discussion around a cum laude system and how it does embrace more students. It is not akin to offering everybody a trophy, but at the end of the day, because, and I think Board Member Miller and Board Member Wilson have both touched on this, students have varied interests. And our entire intention of recognizing students in graduation is not to solely recognize those who took their rigorous coursework, because every student's approach to learning and where they want to end up at the end of high school varies. And so there are opportunities to expand the recognition program. Again, that's why I typically have seen school districts use both the cum laude and the val-sal program simultaneously, so that you still offer that high-level recognition, but for those students who do take all those academically challenging programs and coursework, and they get their heightened GPA, but you also recognize other students within the system who attained at the highest level possible based off their interests and based off their abilities. So there's some validity there to have a discussion about that in the future.
thank you. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you. And then on page 79, the number 5, IB dismissal. Since we don't have an IB principal, I didn't know if you might want to change that to head of school, since we are no longer doing that.
okay, thank you.
And then on page 83, I believe it's the feeder program issues. I didn't see Davenport High School being served at all as far as the magnet and zone to serve targeted communities. That's it.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions? Okay, you're good, sir. Next topic is my topic, an update as to the board retreat. So the dates for the upcoming retreat will probably be finalized by this Friday, September 10th. Dr. Tom Frejo will serve as our facilitator at this time. We are looking for 2 meeting dates for September, two meeting dates, one for September and one again for November, December. The retreats will focus on the topics included but not limited to, and board members, you received these topics a little over a week ago. And I did receive some feedback from Ms. Fields and from others, so I did include them into today's PowerPoint. So the topics that will be addressed will be a review of the existing strategic plan objectives and goals. What did we attain? What did we not attain? And do we have an understanding of why a goal area may not have been met. COVID's a good example of why we may not have attained all of our academic initiatives and outcomes. Discussion of existing target areas, what should we carry forward? There are those, for example, graduation rate should always remain as a sincere effort and focus for our school district. Also, a further discussion on proposed draft goal areas, stakeholder engagement and timelines. Also, the identification of specific areas for analysis and review. For example, and it's been mentioned here already today, how are we evaluating the impact that COVID-19 has on the academic performance, the behavior, attendance, and mental health of our students? And those are significant areas that we have to continue to track and monitor, and they all speak to engagement. We'll get our first true reading on academic impact towards the end of September. We did prioritize all of our schools that showed a decline or would have had a predicted decline in their academic school grade, letter grade assignment this year. They were all to test within the first several weeks of September so we could get a good read on the baseline data to identify whether or not last year's statewide assessment data is reflective of our student outcomes. I think every member of the board and I know the staff and community members will all agree that they were not reflective of student outcomes or what level of proficiency our students had attained. So we'll get a very good read this year as they take their baseline assessments using the process and the assessment platform that we've utilized in Polk County now successfully for several years. Also, we'll have discussion regarding possible revision to the bid and procurement thresholds. That's been requested several times. That will be part of the workshop discussion. Also, discussion regarding establishing monthly board committee structures. This is a topic I'd like to bring forward. I have typically served in school districts where at least no more than 2 board members serve on multiple committees that allow members of my team, members of the community, and others to engage each month in various topics. For example, committees may be comprised of academic committees, school facilities and operations, construction committees, and school finance committees. It allows for a lot more dialogue. It allows us to proceed and move topics forward. It also allows us to build more background knowledge and ensure that we are engaging our community and our board members and our staff in a meaningful way. Also discussing the roles, responsibilities, and legal authority of the school board and that of the school district superintendent, and a discussion of the superintendent's evaluation, for example, the instrument, the metrics, the process, and the timelines for its completion annually. So those are the tentative topics at this time. Again, my understanding based off of my preliminary discussion or email exchange with Dr. Frejo is that he will actually engage with the board individually and have a discussion with you about additional topics and things that you'd like to see addressed as part of these workshops moving forward. And then, as you recall, this will also run simultaneously with the development of the new strategic plan, because as we are meeting, especially if we get a date in November and December, we will have received all of our stakeholder feedback on the portrait of a graduate. We'll have all of our data and analytics comprised at that time. So again, there'll be an opportunity for us to identify and finalize what those objectives are for each goal area, and then we can turn that loose to staff who can begin to start addressing strategies, initiatives, action steps to help address those moving forward so we can get the strategic plan finalized by January or February, which was the established timeline, as you recall.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fields.
So the item 6, the role, responsibility, and legal authority of the school board and superintendent will also encompass the role of the board chair?
Yes, ma'am. The roles of each respective position on the board.
Okay, because I want to make sure that that is very detailed and
Yes, ma'am.
outlined, please. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. Ms. Reynolds?
Do we have any inclination of when a September meeting will be, or is there going to be multiple dates proposed?
We will provide multiple dates.
Okay.
Dr. Frejo has told me he has some availability towards the end of September, so that's what the goal was to meet with him in person this Friday, outline all the steps, get all that information to you, and allow you to start selecting dates and times
Okay,
for
thank
that
you.
meeting. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Miller?
I'd like to know if the contract has been signed with Dr. Frejo, because we have an issue with this moderator. I have respect a lot of his work and what he's done for the city of Winter Haven, but unfortunately, when you're running retreats and doing support of a board and a company and/or school district, it is in the best interest of the school district for that person to be a mediator and to be someone who can bring people together. And unfortunately, Dr. Frejo has made public statements on social media against one or more sitting board members, and I don't know how he will act I don't know how he can act in the capacity of a moderator, a facilitator of a board retreat where he has chosen, which is fine, a lot of people do, to professionally and publicly make statements and/or not only opinions, but unfortunate statements against sitting board members who I think were looking to him for professionalism and respect. This has been brought out. This has been mentioned before. I was told that we would have internal candidates doing this. I think we need to address this issue, and I have not heard that he has felt differently, so I'm not sure why he would want to be involved with a board where he has feelings about two of the sitting members. It's unfortunate, and so we need to clear that up or offer this another direction.
So to clarify, there has been no contract negotiation, nor has there been anything extended to Dr. Frejo. That was me who initially indicated that we would facilitate this internally. However, upon further discussion with several board members, that was not their interest. It is my understanding that Dr. Frejo previously had conflict with a prior board member and that this was not a continuing issue. If you had communicated that, then I failed to recollect that. But I will most certainly address that with him prior to my meeting on Friday and ascertain where he is. And quite frankly, if we can't get beyond that, then we will look for a separate facilitator.
I'll provide the social media post regarding two sitting board members.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Ms. Fortney.
Thank you, Ms. Miller, because I believe I'm the other board member. Imagine that. Who actually hires a facilitator, the board or the superintendent?
I don't know how you've typically done it in the past. We would extend a contract and typically requires both the board chair and the superintendent's signature to execute contracts. Ms. Fields.
If my memory serves me correctly, the superintendent normally gets with the facilitator and create the agenda as you're doing. I know that there has been some, I want to make sure I use the word correctly. I wouldn't say conflict. There might have been just a difference of opinion on some things. I think that Dr. Frejo is very professional, and I think that if you have a conversation with him and share the concerns of Ms. Miller and Ms. Fortney, and hopefully we can let the past be the past and move forward for the future. And if he can't do that, and if you don't feel that he can do that, then I think that we need to look at someone, not internally, I think it needs to be someone externally to do the session for us.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fields, to that point, we had previously reached out to FADS to secure a facilitator as well. But again, based off of his existing knowledge and understanding, Dr. Frejo came as a strong recommendation from several board members, so that's who I engaged in email exchange, and so I looked forward to our September meeting. However, hearing the concerns today, Ms. Miller, quite honestly, it may just make sense to have you, myself, and Dr. Frejo on a phone call and see whether or not he can satisfy your concerns as it relates to these matters. And then I can't put both of you on the phone, and then we could have a separate call with Ms. Fortney, or encourage you to have the conversation outside of me, but with Dr. Frejo. And if you're not satisfied that you feel he's able to separate himself from that, then we'll bring the topic back before the board. But we do have other options, and I do believe, given the history and what I have heard from staff who participate in these, asking for someone internal to be a facilitator at this time is probably not the best idea.
I think we have several options. I would look at some of our county resources. I think there will be several recommendations made. It's unfortunate because I look for people especially people who've been in this community such a long time, to have a high level of integrity and professionalism. And I was shocked at what happened, and it's very unfortunate because I really look at a facilitator who could bring people together, and that wasn't happening unbeknownst to me until I read it. And so I think we have Polk County is a huge county with lots of great leadership that's been around for a long time. And so I really look forward to finding someone who can be a mediator and have the best interest of the entire district and all 7 board members, including our superintendent and staff, as their goal when doing this. Not because they're paid to do it, because they have a vested interest and care about students of Polk County. So I look forward to looking at our options.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fortney, I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, I just would really like to see a fresh set of eyes and ideas also move forward. That's all.
Thank you. Dr. Allen?
Yeah, I appreciate the fruitful discussion, and, you know, obviously, there's a lot of baggage and a lot of history that we could address. I would be curious, you know, I think the personal elements are relevant and, you know, have a place in the conversation. I'd be curious to know, you know, because obviously individuals have credential and practice and so forth. If we look at the past strategic plan, is there anything in the outcome of that strategic plan that would have been a sense of interference in the credibility of Mr. Freed's work in that conversation as well? I think that would be fruitful for me as the new board member. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Next topic, I'd like to bring Ms. Maddie Garcia-Freet to the front. She is our Director for Preschool Programs, and she will talk about the Head Start Continuation Grant. To Board Member Wilson's request previously, this is one of the grants that exceeds, and to Dr. Allen's request previously, this is a continuation. It is renewed on a regular basis, and so that's what we're bringing forward. But again, for the sake of transparency, we wanted to provide a summary as to what the grant entails, what our local requirements are, our local required effort is as well, because it's not just fully funded by the feds, does require a local effort. So Ms. Freet, I'll turn it over before I steal all of your thunder.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Or is it afternoon? It is afternoon. Good afternoon, Board. The Head Start Continuation Grant has a local match requirement, and as time has gone on, you'll remember that we began this grant in 2008, yes. And since then, our local match requirement has grown to $2,143 and change. Most of that match is met by our partnership with the local coalition, the Polk County Early Learning Coalition, through our VPK. All the children in our Head Start classrooms can also receive the VPK funding from the state. Most of that match is met right there. The other part of that match is met by our contractual agreements with vendors and the like, and they give us a 10% discount. We're able to count that. And in times past, we used a huge amount of parental engagement for our local match. Last year, as you can well imagine, our local match came down significantly with our parent engagement. The feds are not holding us to that portion. We have also met local match with other kinds of in-kind services. I believe as we continue, that local match will be continued to be supported through the Polk Early Learning Coalition VPK dollars. I would like to extend that our program with our Head Start families has been a rather successful program, and I believe it should be continued. I want to recommend acceptance, please, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
And I'm assuming this will come before us next meeting for a vote?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Fortney.
I just want to thank Maddie, that they do great work and involve parents. It's one of my favorite things to do, is to be at those policy council meetings.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Reynolds.
Just echoing what Ms. Fortney said, have all of our board members had the opportunity to serve on that committee? Have you, Mr. Allen? It is probably one of the best committees. I'm sorry, I'm going to let your secret out, Ms. Fortney, but it just going to those, there's parents from every Head Start program at that school. They run the meetings completely on their own. They give each other ideas of how to engage their children. both on an educational and social level. But there is so much energy in all of those meetings. They are just so excited and so grateful for the opportunity. So thank you for bringing it to us and all that you do to keep it going.
Thank you. I believe the only members that have, sitting members now that haven't participated as our liaison is Dr. Allen and Lori Cunningham and Ms. Miller.
I've attended in the past, but I've never served.
Yeah, I do remember.
Yes, thank you.
My memory isn't fading me yet.
Dr. Allen, did you have a comment?
Well, I'm ready, so you let me know when. Yeah, and, maybe you can just address the public a little bit, because I did see in this, it's addressing the 2 new sites that we're bringing on board as well, if I believe, right? You got Frostproof and Willow Oak, right?
Yes. Frostproof Ben Hill Griffin
Yes,
Junior
there you go.
Elementary. We have always served Frostproof, but at Frostproof Elementary School. So basically what
Ah,
we did
so
was
it's
we
name
moved
change.
them over.
Mhm.
How we did change this year, and Ms. Miller will be happy to hear this, is we're providing 4 additional blended ESE Head Start units. So those children will have an opportunity to be in a least restrictive environment, but yet be with typically developing peers. And that has been a goal, a long-term goal that we've had. So we've added 4 more sites there and 2 more on the VPK site.
All right, thank you.
I
Ms. Miller.
appreciate that. I think it'll make those students more successful as they enter kindergarten, because it will not be their first time in a general ed experience. They'll have had that pre-K experience. So I think we're going to see a lot of success. It might take a few years to see it, but I think we've started.
It is a
started
leap.
Yes.
It is a leap. It's, we forget sometimes when we're in the ESE world, my experience, probably other people will have different experiences. You forget what typically developing children look like. And when you're in the typically developing world, you forget what atypical children look like. We need to blend them together so that we can provide a series of supports for everyone to succeed. It's like having a ramp to the schoolhouse rather than a staircase. Everybody can access the school via the ramp. So that's what we're trying to do.
And I think data shows us that kids perform. If we want kids to copy behavior, if you put a classroom full of children with autism, they'll learn to be autistic and have autistic behaviors. But if you mix them with typical age peers with typical behavior with the right supports, because if we can't support you or support that program, then that wouldn't be successful. But if you put any child with a disability with their typical age peers, usually with the right supports, you will see a gain in behavior and in academic performance. So I think this is a great forward-moving project for us. Thank you.
Excuse me, with one caveat, as probably is true with all of our different programs around the county, we are finding it very difficult to find highly trained, well-qualified staff. At this point, Head Start is experiencing 14 vacancies across the county.
Superintendent Hyde, do you think that would be an opportunity for us to use, we have high school programs that are pre-K.
Unfortunately, there are federal rules that say what they must have in order to be the lead, and I have to have a lead in every classroom.
I would hope we could turn them out for you, though, for giving certificates in pre-K, or I know one of my high schools has the program, but hopefully we can encourage them and show they could stay here and be employed
To
with
Ms.
that
Freed's point,
certificate.
there may be some additional certifications and trainings that we currently don't offer, but we could definitely do an overlap and do the comparisons to make a determination as to whether or not it's something we can offer, we cannot. And if we cannot, are there opportunities for us to partner with some of our our secondary institutions to see what they may be able to offer through dual enrollment, if for those students pursuing those certificates, that might become a pipeline as well. But yes, we can do that analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Freed.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to bring Mr. Tony Kirk to the front, who will be discussing today's, I apologize, Mr. Kirk, I had it in the wrong order here. I'm going to bring up Mr. Rob Davis, if that's okay, Mr. Kirk, sorry. Mr. Davis and his lovely team Mr. Davis, our Assistant Superintendent for Support Services, is here to talk about an idea that I think many of you are going to find very interesting. It's very innovative, it's new, and very exciting. And, you know, as you look as a school district, where are those opportunities? With an aging fleet, we have opportunities for us to not only procure, but to look at new strategies on how to best address our issues as it relates to vehicles and increase our efficiencies and increase our safety precautions. And so the team is here today to share that with you. And again, you have the ability to drive the presentation from right there.
Thank you, Mr. Hyde. Thank you all for the time, school board members. This is an item that we've actually been thinking of for quite some time. We have a large support fleet that is aged. We have difficulty finding vehicle parts for them. And we're in basically dire straits when it comes to our support vehicle for our tradespersons and for our other support staff. And so we started talking about how to do something internally. And then Mr. Stevenson met with Mr. Don Duckworth, and Scott Reeves did as well. They started talking about Enterprise and how Enterprise may be able to come in and help with our problem that we currently had. So I guess they met with them almost a year ago. So we've been kicking this around for over a year and decided that, you know, it's time to move forward with it. So we've got a large gap that we want to fill, and we feel like this is an opportunity to pilot something that will eventually get us to the point that it will increase the replacement of our vehicles that are critically needed to support the schools. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Duckworth and Mr. Stevenson.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Hyde and Board. Just to walk through some of the current statistics with the light-duty white fleet, it is comprised of 420 vehicles. Currently, 74% of those vehicles are more than 10 years old. The average current age of the fleet is 14 years old, which basically means that right now, vehicles are not being replaced until they are somewhere between 27 and 28 years old. So obviously, some problems incurred from that. Vehicles being older, they're having more maintenance expenses, which is driving up costs. The ability to find parts to actually do the repairs when vehicles go down continues to become more challenging. As we all know, vehicles tend to lose fuel efficiency as they get older, which means that these vehicles are not operating very efficiently and are costing a lot more in terms of fuel dollars and just more consumption of fuel in general. And then probably the most important element is the fact that since you gave me control and I haven't utilized it, my apologies. Since the age of the fleet is now, again, 14 years old, when you look at current safety standards that are mandated as standard equipment in vehicles today, there are quite a few, and we'll list those out shortly, that exist in new vehicles that just were not available back in the time frame that a majority of this fleet was put into service. So with all of those things being said, the key objectives to the pilot program, one, are going to be to replace, the older, less efficient vehicles, to do so in a way, ideally, that helps to also lower both the capital and operating budgets. And then, to that last point, increases the safety of the vehicles, not just for the drivers, but also for the community. In order to do that, we created a list of potential vehicles for the pilot, created a cost analysis that identified not just the right time to replace the vehicles, but also which specific makes and models were determined to be the lowest cost of ownership. So, paddling that on two fronts. Largely based on government pricing, and the equity that comes back from resale, which at this point, when you're dealing with 27, 28-year-old vehicles, there isn't a lot of, but with this program, that's something that we will be able to take advantage of. Lastly, the pilot also, it's important that we be able to provide support, because as we'll see in a moment, there's a lot that goes into it, but to be able to support that effort, not just in transition, but in the ongoing management of the entire process. So in order to shorten the hold period and the cycle time for the vehicles, and at the same time to be able to reduce the capital expense, what the program is going to utilize is a municipal equity lease program, which is a structured finance. The differences between an equity lease and a finance being a way to finance a vehicle down to a zero balance. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to target the right replacement time and then finance only what is necessary to get the vehicle in an equity position at that point. So therefore, it reduces greatly the amount of capital dollars that have to be invested in the vehicle to get it to the cycle point. Since this is a lease, I want to make sure that we're describing some of the things that are more finance than they are lease. These do not have any mileage restrictions. There are no chargeable damage penalties. There are no early termination or is refunded back to the schools. So, that can either be taken as a straight credit, or that can be used as possibly a pre-fund for the next replacement cycle of vehicles. So again, it's your principal and equity. It's money that comes back to the schools. So as we get into the actual numbers of the pilot, we are looking to replace 49 existing vehicles, plus an additional 7 vehicles that are currently needed. So that's a 56 vehicle total. I'm going to click ahead to see. Okay. So looking at how the numbers break down. So what you're going to see now is in fiscal 2022, we have the 56 vehicles. The lease costs for those 56 vehicles would total $189,342. It's important to note that that only represents 7 months worth of lease expense. If the decision is made to move forward, the vehicles would need to be ordered. They wouldn't be delivered until about 6 months into the fiscal year. We're figuring about March timeframe, which gives 7 months from March to September worth of expenses there. The 49 vehicles that are being replaced, we're anticipating to have an estimated equity amount just under $74,000. So that's existing vehicles being sold. And so what we're showing now is a total net cost of $115,000, just basically the difference between the lease cost and then the equity coming back from the resale of the existing 49. It's important to show sustainability of this program if it's something that's determined to move forward with. So looking out into 2023, what you're going to see is, and let me pause just momentarily, part of the analysis that we put together on the 56 vehicles was determining the lowest total cost of ownership timeframe. And so in that process, it was determined that 40 of the 56 vehicles were most opportune to be cycled at a 12-month period, meaning they're only going to be in service 12 months before replaced. The 16 additional vehicles was determined to be at a 5-year point. So when you look at the 56 vehicles in 2022, and then you look at the 2023 total of only 40, that's 40 vehicles that would be ordered and replaced for the 40 vehicles that are just on the 12-month lease terms. So now in 2023, what we're looking at is a full 12 months worth of lease costs, which is represented by the $324,000 number. Since there are none of those vehicles currently county vehicles that would be sold, there's no more equity coming from the resale of the county's vehicles, but we would be replacing those 40 vehicles, which means that 40 of the 12-month terms would be coming out and sold, and we're anticipating that equity to be $283,000. So again, if we look at the lease cost minus the equity from 40 of the 56 vehicles coming back, the total budget impact that we're forecasting for 2023 would be $40,000. As we look ahead, because again, 40 vehicles would be continually replaced at 12 months, you'd have 12 months worth of lease expense, and you would have, again, 40 vehicles worth of equity coming back. So we're looking at 2024 and 2025 to look very much like 2023. As we look out into the fifth year, 2026, now all 56 vehicles will be replaced. You'd have, again, the 40 12-month terms, and then you'd also have the 16 that were on 5-year, 60-month terms that would be coming due, replaced. So now 56 vehicles worth of equity would be coming back in, and we're estimating that to come in at $382,000, which exceeds the actual lease cost for that 12-month time frame by $57,000. So that basically is a $57,000 surplus over and above what the cost is, coming back to the schools. So if we look at those 5 years and the total budgets for those years, what the average comes to is $35,000 net cost, which if we take that down to a per vehicle, annual per vehicle expense, we're looking at $641 per vehicle that the school will be able to operate these vehicles. So that's pretty much giving a summary of the capital expense. In your board packet, I believe page 5, you do have a more detailed version of the numbers that go into this summary. But we mentioned also, in addition to just capital, we're looking at it reducing the operating budget. So as we look at the current combined maintenance and fuel totals for the 49 vehicles that are being proposed to be replaced, that number's coming to $120,000 a year. If replaced, those 49 vehicles plus the 7 additional vehicles that are being proposed look to have a combined maintenance and fuel total of $85,000. So we're looking at a reduction by $35,000 in operating expenses, while also at the same time increasing the total number of vehicles by 7. And page, I believe, 6 of the board synopsis also provides further detail into where that summary is coming from.
If I may add, these are actually figures that Mr. Reeves pulled from our maintenance records and our fuel records. So these are actual costs that Mr. Reeves did pull from those 49 vehicles.
Okay, so on this condensed version of this presentation, we don't have the safety improvement, the safety features listed out. However, in your board synopsis you do, but I would like to just pause real quickly to run through some of the more notable ones. The 2022 models are going to include electronic stability control, which didn't really become mandated until 2012. Again, we're dealing with vehicles that have an average model year age of 2007 right now, so obviously 5 years prior. These vehicles are also going to have not just the airbags up front, but also the side impact airbags, as well as what they call the curtain airbags up top. So just in terms of additional driver safety. And then, probably the one that I fought with for a while and then finally adopted, but the rear vision camera, actually using it, has reduced significantly the number of incidences of people backing into objects or, God forbid, people. So those are some of the things that, again, are lacking in the vast majority of the existing vehicles that would all be part of any vehicles that you all do moving forward. Shifting gears, getting to just tracking and reporting, part of this program, again, is layering in support. So not just to help support services manage, because as you can imagine, if we're replacing vehicles in a 12-month timeframe. There's a lot of ordering of vehicles. There's a lot of analysis that goes into which vehicles to order. There's delivery of the vehicles, picking up the old one, the resale process. So we have a dedicated support team, an account management team, which I'm one of, that would be working directly for support services and reporting to support services to help them with as much of that as is necessary, and possibly even to be able to take about 95% of that off of their desk. A big other part of this is going to be to provide them with tracking and reporting. So not just to allow them to oversight the process and look at the expenses, but also to provide whatever transparency is necessary. Since this is a new program, we recognize that this is going to be something that probably a lot of people's eyes are going to want to be able to take a look at, and so we want to be able to provide that level of transparency. In the board packet, as you can see here, we have provided a list of, not exhaustive list, but just a list of some of the current references and partners that we're currently working for. And then let me go back one, sorry. And then also in the board synopsis, we've provided several formal case studies provided by other school districts that you can look at and see the actual results that they've experienced on the same program. So that pretty much concludes the presentation. I do have Mr. Steve Podosic, who's our finance manager, also a CPA, so if there are any questions that get too deep into the accountant weeds, I'll be glad to bring him up, but please, if there are any questions, we'd be happy to field those.
Ms. Fortney first.
Yeah, thank you. I trust Mr. Davis has done his homework, and I've got it from a pretty good source that it's going to be a good deal. I just have a couple specific questions. One, we can get out of this at any time, right?
Yes, ma'am.
If we're not satisfied, for
Yes,
lack of a
ma'am.
better word. Okay. And two, when I'm looking at the list, and because I did read all this, the Silverados, the Transit, those come already, like for a maintenance crew to just move their tools from one truck to another, or do we have to do any kind of retrofitting, or
Yes, ma'am.
or if that is what they're even being used for? I mean, it doesn't really say what they're, okay, sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The list is broke down, the Silverado pickup trucks.
Right.
The regular cab pickup trucks are for the facilities department, and what they will do is we will have toolboxes, side boxes mounted on those vehicles along with ladder racks as needed. Most trades, some need, some don't.
Right.
So instead of doing the one-size-fits-all that we've done in the past, where the district has ordered one-ton, fuel-heavy vehicles that are not really conducive to what the facilities department needs for a pest control technician versus a plumber, we're giving them a toolbox with which to build what they want. The pickup truck comes as is, and then the facilities department can mount boxes if they so choose, ladder racks, they can customize it to their need. And then the plan moving forward is as we replace them every year, those boxes can be removed and attached to the replacement vehicle every year, so we're not reoccurring that additional cost of the racks and the toolboxes. Those will be carried over for as long as necessary until they become.
And all that is included in the price right here, or is that going to be extra?
No, ma'am, that would be up to the facilities department.
That's
That would come
what
out
I
of their
mean. So
individual
we'll have to
operating
do that.
budget. Yeah, that would come out of the facilities department's operating budget if they wanted to accessorize the vehicles, which is what we're doing now.
Gotcha.
Any replacement vehicles that we replace now, the facilities department comes in and they install their own equipment on those vehicles.
And
We
then
just order the
our
vehicle.
maintenance would have to obviously do the maintenance, right?
Yes, the vehicle services department would still maintain and do the services as needed. We're projecting that due to the age of these vehicles and the mileage being so low that we are replacing them every year, that the operational maintenance costs will be super low, number one. Number two, they may not even need an oil change the life of the vehicle. Depending on, most manufacturers are bumping up to 10,000 miles now, and most of these vehicles were averaging 7,900 miles a year on a maintenance vehicle, so these will be replaced possibly before we even need to do an oil change on them. So those operational costs will be much lower, we're projecting, on the new vehicles. Yes, ma'am.
All right, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Miller?
Since we're talking the white fleet, and I do appreciate the work's done on this, obviously it looks like it's going to be a savings for the district. I know when I first came on the board, we talked about transportation and facilities, and these kinds of issues are always, places where we need to make up revenue. We talked about at one time advertising on our white fleets, and other places have done that. just to pick up revenue that way. Is that something that can be done, or did you run into barriers with trying to provide, or the district would have to decide if that's something they wanted to do? But I know at one time we talked about using our white fleet to do some kind of advertising, depending on what the advertisements were, to generate revenue.
So, we have looked at it in the past with, I think it's Alpha Media company that could put them on our box trucks and our cargo trucks, because those are our biggest platforms, and so those are basically rolling billboards for, but when you get into the advertisement, you kind of have to figure out what you can advertise. So if, let's say, someone wanted to advertise Borden's milk, that would probably not be an issue at all. But if someone wanted to advertise something about Beef O'Brady's, which serves alcohol, for instance, we may have to look at that. So there may need to be a panel that approves advertisement, and so that is something that is still available if we do not go into the, because there is a possibility that if this is successful, Mr. Reeves and Mr. Stevenson have also looked at Penske to look at our larger vehicles. And so if we did something like that, I'm not sure if we could do wraps and things of that nature on the lease vehicles. I'm not, that would be something that we'd have to, if we continue to purchase those outright, then yes, we could.
Okay.
If I can, just to address, since these are equity leases, and I mentioned the ownership piece, then absolutely, these vehicles will be able to be wrapped. And just, we wouldn't associate any of that cost with the leases. So that would be something that, the school would just pay for separately. Honestly, the benefit on the resale piece is typically, especially with the longer leases, any wrap that's done prevents some of the oxidation of the paint. So they actually turn out being in a little bit better shape, let's say 5 years down the road for those longer leases. So there could be some advantage on resale.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that was still, if we were looking into that, because any dollars, and I don't even know if we did the cost analysis, if it would be worth the time that your office would have to spend on it. But it was just another avenue to create a revenue stream.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Great question.
Dr. Allen and Mr. Bridges.
Well, since he's going to go after me, I was really going to advocate for Mr. Bridges' face to be advertised on all of the fleet vehicles. So if that's okay. No, I appreciate this, Mr. Davis. I know your efficiency is there, and your thriftiness is there. So I would have loved to seen a picture or two of some of these, 74% of our fleet being that old. I think that would have definitely convinced me as well. But yeah, I'm just curious, question on delivery. So we're looking at, you mentioned March as a delivery. I know there's a lot of conversation on the chip shortages and so forth and how some of those things are impacting the automotive industry. And then what you're thinking as far as that existing equity and moving that, just maybe hearing a little bit about that. Second question was obviously we've seen the resale on used vehicles go up just because of that shortage in regards to supply and demand. Was curious, what you base that estimation of equity on. So that's like guaranteed revenue, and just curious, what we base that estimation of equity on that rolling basis on. So.
Sure. Okay, so with the first question in terms of the ordering of the vehicles, so the things that we do know this year because of the microchip shortages, stock availability is almost next to nothing. So we're talking about vehicles that are factory ordered directly with the manufacturers. So what we have been told, and this is directly from the manufacturers to our organization, is that we're dealing with a very short window this year to actually place factory orders. Where a normal year, we can place those typically in July, and that may last until May. This year, they are just now opening. I think Chevy in the last few days has just opened up, or GM, I should say, in just the last few days has opened up their order banks for like the half-ton and three-quarter-ton pickups. They have told us that time frame to order might be as little as a month. So we are dealing with a very compressed amount of time to get orders in. So There is availability. We should not have a difficult time delivering the vehicles that are ordered. The exact date that they would be delivered is all going to be predicated on how long it takes them to manufacture them. But we are being told that the reason they're reducing the time frame is because they don't want to over-order and then under-deliver. They want to be able to deliver the ones that are ordered. So we feel pretty confident that, that 6 to maybe 7-month time frame should be achievable based on information we're hearing, as long as we get the orders in. The second part of the question with the resale, when we first started doing this analysis, and actually the conversations began almost 18 months ago, some of the resale values that we were looking at are still several months ago. So we understand that used vehicles have appreciated in the last few months, so this isn't fully recognizing that. So there might be some variances. The market may go down, but if we compare it to '08 and '09, when the market was in the exact opposite direction, there were more vehicles to sell than there were people to buy them, the market was off 20%. So if you want to use that as a basis to kind of compare what the equity could look like, 80% of what we're dealing with, we still feel pretty confident we're in good shape in terms of budget.
Thank you.
Ms. Fields?
So I had a conversation with Mr. Davis, and he answered a lot of my questions, and I think this is a very good opportunity for us. I just had one question. This is a complete lease agreement, correct?
If I could ask you to maybe further explain.
It's not lease to purchase anything.
This is an equity lease, which means that it is made up of principal and interest components. So there's a delivered price that's stated, and every month that a payment is made, it is reducing the balance that is owed. So this is a lease from the standpoint of until the complete payment has been made, we're still the title holders for the vehicle.
Okay.
But that's, again, no differently than a bank holding a lien on a title. So at any time, the decision would be made to either, pay off the balance or just continue making payments. We're setting, again, 40 of these up on 12-month terms. If the decision was made not to replace those, then what we could essentially do with those vehicles is just have you continue making payments, and eventually they're paid down to a zero balance, and the school would own the vehicle. So you have definitely the same options
So you have
with these
options.
leases that you would with a normal bank finance. You can, pay it off earlier, turn it in. And the only risk, I guess, to the schools, although we've tried to stay ultra conservative, the risk to those schools would only be with really the longer term leases. If they were to be turned in early, let's say only a year into 5 years, then there is a potential that we haven't financed enough of them to catch up with how much they've lost value in the market. But again, when we go back to the support services being offered, that's one of the analysis that we're going to be providing on an ongoing basis, is what position these vehicles look like relative to their balance and resale equity. So that's something that we can, 12 months down the road, be able to report back to the board and give, kind of a state of the union of what it looks like, what we thought it would look like versus what it does.
So there are options.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bridges?
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. For most purposes, the district is self-insured, or more precisely, self-funded for liability purposes. And my question is it contemplated that these vehicles would be treated the same way as our owned vehicles for that purpose, or is there a separate insurance cost?
No, sir. They would be handled the same way. As you can see from a list of some of the existing partners that we're with, they're handled in the same fashion with our vehicles as they are with their own. So typically it's through risk management pools, and contractually that's layered into our lease agreement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Mr. Kirk?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members, Superintendent Hyde. I have before you a couple of items regarding reorganization and position description revisions. The first one is learning support, the support reorg. What we're doing here is consolidating the senior coordinator, PBIS, and the senior coordinator multi-tiered support system into one director. And then we're looking to promote the existing director of ESE to senior director of ESE. The financial impact for these revisions is a $44,831 savings. Any questions on this one?
Ms. Miller?
Sir?
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. The first two positions that you read, that they're going to be consolidated,
Yes. Read them again.
yes, are those currently filled?
I believe that the PBIS position has been vacant and been covered by a senior cord for, since April of 2021. And based on that, they believe that those responsibilities can be managed effectively by consolidating those two senior core positions into the one director's position.
And the director of ESC, will anything change in the role and responsibility of that position?
I can't speak to that other than,
Dr. Lutz, please come to the table.
right, thank you.
At this time, is this on? Okay. At this time, Mr. Kirk is correct. On the first question, the senior coordinator PBIS position has been vacant since the end of April of 2020. And that responsibilities for that has fallen to the senior coordinator of MTSS. So when we did the financial analysis, combining those two, collapsing those two and creating a director position would be financially advantageous to the district. As far as the director of ESE promotion to senior director, that is in line with previous decisions that this board has made and is well within my purview to propose additional changes to that job description. The job description for now simply remains as it is. However, my expectation with the promotion is there would be an increase in responsibilities.
So my question is, we're collapsing one position, but we still have an increase, and that's because of
The overall net is 44, or
Yeah, the
savings of
overall-
44,000.
Yes, there's a savings of 44,000.
Okay, I'm
by
sorry.
collection.
When I read that, I thought this should be a savings, not
It is a
incurring.
savings.
Okay,
It is,
thank you.
even with the promotion of the ESE director to senior director.
And that's along the line of what the superintendent has been working on and suggested for multiple areas.
Correct. If you recall, the past several board meetings have had similar actions.
Thank you, thank you,
All
Tony.
right, thank you. And then the next item for your consideration is, again, another reorganization and some position description upgrades for the federal programs and grants management. The proposed reorganization for the federal programs and grant management is structured to promote alignment and job descriptions and compensation with current employee duties, ensure positions remain competitive in the current job market, as well as address some of the long-term succession planning that we want to do. And the savings and impact financial savings is $79,361, 79,361.
Any questions regarding that, so I could bring staff to the table if needed? Okay.
You can, if you do.
Greg, if you look at the spreadsheet that is included with the board docs, it also references a change of a position from a para-basic to a secretary 10-month position. That is in our social work department. That position is currently vacant, and the stipulation on the para positions actually requires a higher level of education than for a secretary position. So by changing the designation to a secretary, we hope to open the applicant pool to more people. It is a slight increase of $1,783, but that is included in the net savings of $44,831.
Any further questions about the teaching and learning changes for federal grants, federal programs? Ms. Reynolds?
This isn't necessarily on that, but just when we're formatting them on board docs, if there's two separate spreadsheets, can you list them as two, at least in the text, just say there's two items?
Yes.
Because I didn't see the second one until just now. It all looks good, but just in the future, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So in totality, both actions would result in a little over 110 or 100, almost $120,000 in savings. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, thank you, sir.
Mr. Edgar Santiago, Director for ESOL, is here to talk about English language acquisition, language enhancement, and academic achievement continuation grant. Again, this is a grant that we're getting renewing, so it is reoccurring, but it does exceed the $1 million threshold established so that we provide an explanation and narrative as to its support. So, Mr. Santiago, it's all yours, sir.
Thank you, sir. The purpose of the Title III is to, like Mr. Hyde has in the slide, is to provide the students support for language acquisition and student achievement. In this year's grant, we are requesting 2 new positions to be added to the staff that will provide support to our school. This is supplemental to what already the district provides to our schools. This will be able to provide assistance in schools to teachers with professional development, modeling in classrooms, and also parental involvement. So those are right now I only have, the ESOL department has 7 TRSTs that are working at schools, over 125 schools. So the 2 additional positions will be put to great use, and it will definitely be monitored, and we'll be able to report back how it does impact the student achievement in our schools. Also, some of the dollars from the grant will be to increase the license of Rosetta Stone's program for our students. Many of our students are coming to our country. They are limited in their English language, and having the first step is to obtain that language acquisition, the social language. And Rosetta Stone, although no academic in nature, it does provide the support for them to learn the basics of English, and then therefore can move forward to learn the academic language that is required so they can be successful in taking the state exams. Any questions?
No questions. You did an excellent job, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The board previously, as our next 2 guests, I'm going to ask Mr. Bruce Weber and Lauren Hollander to please come to the podium here, or to the table here. The board previously had indicated an interest in hearing, because several of you had conversations individually as it relates to construction, other construction opportunities. And so my commitment to the board and to our community for full transparency is anytime there's a good idea, just as you just saw with enterprise leasing, as an opportunity for our school district, we should do our due diligence and at least afford the opportunity for the board to hear those options. And then what will happen subsequent to this meeting is the board will provide any additional questions that you may not think of today, but then staff will address several concerns and questions at a subsequent meeting. So there is no vote on this topic before the board this evening or this afternoon. It's simply a matter of me honoring your requests for transparency and allow this conversation and narrative to unfold. So I will turn it over.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde, and thank you for having us here today to discuss what we think is a very important topic. I would say that it's similar to the enterprise rental car, and I was going to ask those guys to help us co-present after I watched them. They did such a good job, and that it truly is innovation, and that is what we are here to talk about today. We think the important topic of the day for us is to effectively lower Polk County's cost per student station. Lowering Polk County's cost per student station is directly linked, if you will, to lowering the cost of Polk County schools. And we think that's very important, is you will able to, when you lower the cost of schools, you're able to build more schools given the same available funding. That's why is that important to Polk County today more than it's ever been before? It's really so important because of the unprecedented amount of growth that Polk County is experiencing. And we'll talk a little bit more about the need. We call it the need for more schools in just a minute. What's our desired outcome for today? Our desired outcome is really for you, hopefully, to walk away from this dialogue being as excited as we are about the potential for building more schools through that lowering of the cost per student station. Before we leave the first slide, Lauren, if you don't mind, could you just make a statement about that school, the picture of that school?
Thank you, Superintendent, board members. Thank you for having us here today. The slide that Bruce is referencing happens to be innovative, and it was the first school built after the Parkland disaster, where many of the safety features that were required were included in this particular design, and not only in its shape for access, but in the internal components, and something as simple as a tilt wall construction corridor as opposed to framed, just for safety features. And so we also want you to know in our school design moving forward, we also have a number of not just safety but health features that become standard.
And you were responsible for
We
helping to
did.
design that and build that school.
We did.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. In terms of agenda, we'd like to do a better job of introducing ourselves than we just have. And we'll talk about the needs and timing for Polk County. We'll talk about what we're discussing internally is the Polk solution, which includes financial advantages that our solution brings to the table, as well as specifically what are the buildings about. We'll talk specifics about smart buildings, and we'll be happy to answer any questions along the way that you may have. Next. So what are we? We're a comprehensive single source of responsibility. It's a nice way of saying a turnkey solution, but we are 100% responsible, that builds modern, safe, efficient, right-sized, full amenity facilities that meet or exceed all state public regulations, rules, and standards. There isn't a compromise here. We're going to build very high-quality schools, fully amenitized, and we'll do that in what we call a right-sized format. Specifically, I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but we get involved in needs analysis for districts, everything regarding the site in terms of identification, selection, acquisition, and the site development itself, all governmental agency permitting and approvals. We work collaboratively with the staff, the district staff, to make sure that we're meeting the design needs of the school and of the area that we're serving. We are engaged in civil engineering, transportation studies. We build SREF standards. And I think it's important, a couple of important cost points. We are going to guarantee that we meet the student station cost caps. And when we start the project, we will guarantee our price. We'll have a gross maximum price that doesn't go up over time. What we say in the beginning, we'll work diligently with you and your staff to build out a projection of what the school needs are and the programs are. We'll set a price, and that will be the price from the beginning to the end, and we'll take responsibility for that. There's no cost to the school before occupancy. We think that's very important. That leaves you a lot of dry powder to deploy in other areas. Early occupancy, if we're given enough time, and we believe we have enough time now, and we're talking about a 23-24 year, that we'll deliver the school early, and that the communities that we live in, that you serve, will be seeing a completed school months before school starts. And we're also doing the capital repairs. We'll actually maintain the capital repair of the edifice through the life of the lease, which basically eliminates what we would call deferred maintenance on your part. That said, I think I'll hand it over to Lauren to talk a little bit more about the background of our team.
A little bit about our background. We've been in the educational facility construction development for over a decade and have been responsible for approximately 30,000 student stations throughout Florida. And with that, we have acted in the same type of capacity where we do a complete turnkey. From given a designated geographic area, we acquire the site, go through all of the entitlement process, do the vertical construction, on-site improvements as well as off-site improvements, handle all of the FF&E, and if in fact the client would like for that to be done, and we deliver those school facilities on time every time. What's really also important is that it stays within budget. And so that's been one of our key components as well. What we also anticipate with those turnkeys, and one of the proposals that we are having discussions with staff is for a Polk County facility that would also include the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, the FF&E as we call it. The needs and the timing. The really good news is people want to come and live in Polk County. The really good news is that means that you have an area that has a tremendous amount of growth. And with growth, what we utilized in your 5-year work plan is trying to analyze what that trajectory looks like. And I know all of you are familiar with the impact fee that's assessed on the new construction. And so there is a dollar amount that's projected of what that would be over the next 5 years. We took that and tried to estimate what that truly meant for you. And what that calculated to was approximately 37,000 new students over the next 10 years. When we looked at just the next 4 years, there were a total of 22,000 new students expected. And that was on a conservative side with how many students per household. But what that also meant was, and it's part of what brought us to Polk County, was the reality that we are working hand in hand with developers who are very deliberate in the areas that they are developing within. And they expressed to us, could you possibly consider coming up here, do some analysis, and help us with a school solution that would work in conjunction with our district. Because we do build school facilities for multiple occupants. And one of the things is to consider how does this align as a supplemental solution for Polk County to come alongside with that growth with what your existing plan may be for school development. What we've shown here on this map for you is an approximate 8 to 9 mile radius. And what we are very aware of is there are approximately 12,000 new home sites in this radius of development, in various stages. Some are actually turning dirt and expect that those homes will move rather quickly. And so when we are looking at this, I think the most important thing that we've tried to work alongside with school district, considering this, is how do we properly time this and the logistics of that. And so what we look at with this is we have a proposal for a delivery of school year 23-24. And we have 2 actual sites that are located in this radius there that would help serve that growth. With one of the areas, it happened to be a proposal that you had looked at for the Point Siena area, what I think they referred to as Point Siena, but the location would allow for some additional areas to be served as well. But we have done some analysis here and find that that's an immediate area of potential opportunity to help.
Just to add one more thing to that, if you look and put another circle on top of that circle, there is almost an equal amount of homes going in just north of there as well. So it's a pretty fascinating growth area. For those of you who are serving that district, it's quite amazing. The growth is spectacular. And of course, that brings along, I guess, the challenges of building new schools and the opportunities to build new schools.
Okay. So what we're bringing to the table is, that has a number of different financial advantages, and that's trying to bring this cost-efficient school design, which would be what they refer to in the industry as right sizing, to make sure that we are building at a rate that we can produce enough student stations as the demand warrants. And so this design of a school that we come to you with is considering the right sizing that the state is using. And some of the districts before you have had to handle the growth. The right size was imperative for them to bring these facilities and plants in alignment with the cost per student stations that are statutory. We also bring this without a large capital outlay to the district. That you would not have any expenses incurred until such time that the school is actually in its first fiscal year. So we would deliver in May of '23, for example, and your staff can prepare and occupy, and then the fiscal year of the 23-24, you would begin the first payment. There is a guaranteed maximum price that we find is extremely important because it means working in collaboration with your staff and district leadership to design the programs that you want there, as well as the needs for the facility and the athletic components. And then that is what we guarantee that we will deliver that particular facility at upon completion. And so it eliminates escalations, it eliminates uncertainties for your own projections. We also deliver that with a 5-year warranty, and then we include within our lease payment a dollar amount that's called capital repair escrow, and it has a prescriptive schedule for certain things to be done to the facility on a regular scheduled basis, which will eliminate the deferred maintenance that often creeps up on the facilities. We do bring many of the private sector efficiencies, and we've had a number of conversations about this. Probably the most important component about that is the timing. If the decision is to do this in Polk County, the delivery is rather quick. We immediately get to work. We have quite a few initiatives that have already been done in the approval process for one of the sites that will be a school facility. And so we move through things in a pretty rapid pace, but we also execute with a guaranteed price with our subs as well. Bruce?
Yeah, there was certainly a lot of interest in what type of buildings are we building, and we wanted to say this. We don't have enough time to go into more detail today, but we are absolutely engaged in best-in-class design and construction. These are high integrity, high quality, very efficient buildings that will be aesthetically pleasing, and buildings that will be ensure that there's a pleasant student environment as well. We talked a little bit about rigorous construction management process. Lauren talked about safety earlier and how these are effectively the most contemporary ideas in safety. Just to make sure we say it again, fully compliant in SREF state statutes. These buildings, these schools are going to meet every regulation, every bit of code that is required from the state statute. I'll let you take the lead.
So we come to you with these options, and we look to answer any questions anybody may have. We've worked with the staff on a few preliminary questions and discussion points. We look forward to working with the superintendent and district leadership to work collaboratively and discern exactly where the priorities are and where we supplement what your existing plan is. And we thank you for your time and attention on this matter.
Any questions? Mr. Wilson?
No question, just some comments. Over the past few weeks, several weeks, I guess, I've worked very closely with Bruce and Lauren, and you know, this is difficult because we've had our staff working on something in this area for some time, but we've now been approached, or we have approached, I think we actually approached them and asked for another solution. The bottom line is this: they have access to economies of scale that we don't. Significantly greater economies of scale than we have as a school district, and that's why they're, at the end of the day, able to do this so much more efficiently and quicker. But in addition to that, they have access to a location that we simply don't have access to. It's an individual, a private donor, who, because of the connections with these folks, has agreed to allow us access to some property that's absolutely perfect. It's a piece of property that will support Haines City, Lake Hamilton, Point Siena, of course, most importantly, but also Lake Wales. This piece of property, its location, will be supportive of Lake Wales. If you've been watching the news, there's an expectation that Lake Wales will double in population over the next few years, and they will support that area as well, which will take a lot of pressure off of the charter school we have in that area, the charter high school. So this is a proposal that I would hope that we as a board would embrace and ask staff to continue working with these folks on. It's what it will, most importantly, what it will do. And we went out for the Polk Promise. We talked about an amount of funding that would be available for deferred maintenance. We have a lot of really old buildings in our school district. We're not going to be able to meet that without some help from the private sector. And we're not going to be able to meet that promise, frankly. So I'm hoping we can, that we can direct staff to continue to working with these folks to see if we can find a solution moving forward. Thank you.
Ms. Miller?
I too, Mr. Wilson mentioned the Polk Promise and the amount of schools in this district. I forget, at one time we had the number. The age of them is just astonishing, what we're trying to go in and piecemeal together with limited funding. This is one thing that I thought being able to free up dollars for capital projects is something very positive for the district because we have so much work to do. Again, that area is growing, and I remember asking the question, do we need another school out there because we have so many charters that are coming into that area, but we can't base our enrollment on charters that may not be open or stay open. And so I am concerned with the amount of growth and being able to accommodate them. Every school we open out there is at capacity. The elementary school, I remember, we had no idea what that would have with the expansion. We just had a lot of there's a lot of growth there, and there will continue to be growth. So, I think this is a great idea. Public-private partnerships it's not like we're not doing them. CFAA is a great example of a public-private partnership with that facility. This is new, and I'd hope that we could work with our staff to find out location-wise if this is, where we need to be at the time and how this process will work, because it is brand new. But thinking out of the box and trying to use those dollars that, these people worked hard on that half-cent sales tax committee to build the public's trust in what we were doing. So I want to be good stewards of those dollars, and I think this may give us an opportunity to do that. So I would like to expand the conversation and keep working to see if this is a good fit. I think it's going to help us in multiple areas, not just with the capacity for the high school, but freeing up dollars to help us in other schools and other areas of the district where the aging buildings are just hurting us. And I have some in my district that are at capacity. They're the old schools with wooden floors, and there's nowhere to build around. So we have some challenges with limited funding, and I hope this will be able to open up some of that.
Ms. Fields?
Okay, I have quite a few questions. At one point in time, we as a school board and the county would meet periodically to discuss concurrency issues, and we have not done that in a while. And we've also worked hand in hand with the Board of County Commissioners Planning staff. So this question is probably a question for our staff. Do we have a concurrency issue in Polk County that is impacting the residential development community? If so, is there a report available demonstrating the magnitude of the issue?
Go ahead, Ms. Usher. You'll have to come to the mic, though. We'll need you to be on mic.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Fields. Since we implemented school concurrency in this county, I'm proud to say no developer has ever had to mitigate. We have a demographer that we work with. We work closely with the developers. We work closely with the county. We have a planning forum, and we talk to the developers regularly to look at their build-out. Yes, a lot of units might be approved, but they won't be dumped in right away. So when I brought that site to you all at Poinciana, I wasn't happy about that site either. But because of all the growth that was going on, we have school sites for all our other schools except the high school. And we don't usually go out and ask anybody to bring us site because we don't pay commission, we don't pay administrative fee. This person just brought this site to us, and we said it's a good location. We talked to transportation, but no way would I ever purchase a site that's not buildable. According to our plan and what I presented the capital plan to you in October 27, 2020. In that plan, I said we'll put in a high school if needed within the 5 years. When I came to you in June, I showed you some data that was quite aggressive that showed a high school at the end of the 5-year term. I'm getting ready to bring that plan back to you with all our projections. And we're not growing at any 5,500 a year. Talk to DOE, talk to DJ Dines, talk to our demographer. We're growing between 1,000 or 2,000 a year. And that is, I mean, certainly DOE has us projected at 98,000. I'm not talking charter schools. In 5 years, I know that's kind of low, so I might work with DOE to bring that up a bit, and I have to justify it if I do that. But I'll come back to you in October with the plan that shows the earliest we need a high school is between 25 and 30. So I want to have the site now so we can start working and not be rushed. We can build schools. I delivered 4 schools from 2018 to 2021. We have a competitive process where we don't have one developer, one CM, or one architect. We go out, so we use much more people. We have our money. We don't build schools with sales tax. We build schools with impact fees. The only reason we use sales tax for the high school because it was part of the bond, $64 million. And so we used our impact fees to build schools. I have impact fees right now for the new elementary school. I'm building in 21C. I have impact fees to purchase the high school property. So it won't be taking away from all our other projects. I know what we have to get done. And if anybody served on the sales tax committee, you can see all the projects we have done with sales tax, and I have a list of those. So we're doing everything to the older schools. I have Lena Vista coming up for modernization. We have Stanmore rebuild and Auburndale Central. We have a lot of schools in our plan that I'll present to you. And I also have the 15-year sales tax plan to show you what we will do with sales tax money, and we'll deliver what we promised the people we'll do. And that's why I'm working so aggressively, because I want to make sure we have the capacity, and we promised, I went out there asking for that, for them to renew it. And I want to make sure, and I'm after staff to make sure we work fast to do it. I don't understand, but I try to do the best we have, and I think I have a good staff, and we have the money to get it done, and we don't need a high school tomorrow. And we can build schools quickly, too. I mean, I could have a school ready in I'll have 3 schools ready in 23. I'll have Southwest Middle, Garner Elementary, 21C, we have a Denison Gym, and we have a Medalla Cafeteria that will be next year. I'll deliver 3 schools that we're just working on in 2023 with different architects and different CMs throughout the county.
Okay, don't leave. Thank you for that answer. I think one of the things, Superintendent Hyde, that we really need to look at is the concurrency issue, and seeing if we might be able to start having those meetings again, and they used to be annually.
I agree.
To have discussion, to see exactly where we are, and if we are impeding or impacting development.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's very important. And then I think this is a question also for Ms. Usher. What are our current facility needs based on our current growth projections? Do you know that?
What our,
What are our current facility needs based on our current projections?
until 2025, we're okay. Now, when we go from 25 to 30, we might have 4 elementary school, 1 middle, and an 1800 high school. But right now, because we open, whenever we modernize a school, we try to add capacity if capacity is needed. So we are doing that at Mulberry, and we did that at Willow Oak. So if you look at our student stations and our capacity, we have like 15,000 more capacity today than students. It might not be in the right location. For example, Tanner Rock might be under-enrolled, while Ridge and Haynes are over-enrolled. But that's another committee I spoke to the superintendent about that we're going to do, meet with the academic staff, see what programs we can do to pull students to those schools and to kind of balance enrollment throughout the county.
If I may too, part of what's being discussed here is we approach it from a known variable. What are we hearing? What is definitely in planning? What is being, how are our commissioners being approached? How is zoning being impacted with submissions for plans and construction and development? So we operate from a known commodity. And then we use that growth as a model to predict future growth. The problem for Polk County right now is we're the second fastest growing county in the entire nation, and we grow more every day. Whether that always equates to student seats has yet to be seen. What others are telling us, and what this group has shared in our meetings, is that they know of planned developments that have yet to be finalized. And that's our concern, is what happens. And to Ms. Usher's point, and I think along the lines of concurrency, not only do we have to readdress concurrency, we have to readdress school zoning across our entire school district. To Ms. Usher's point, we have available seats. They are not where they're most needed, because we have some high schools that are well over capacity and other high schools that are well under capacity. And I think we have to get both creative, and throwing programs at schools isn't always the best solution either, because the school has to own the program and have a true and sincere commitment to honoring the program. So your building principal, your staff, and everyone else, it's programs placement is, and ensuring that the staff have the will and the desire and the passion to ensure that a program is successful and not just there in name only is really important. But I do think we're going to have to look at other options. I like the fact that Polk County has not been reluctant to look at more creative options for schools. Frost-proof middle school, high school. We have a few high schools. We have 2 middle school high schools. You know, what happens to Tanner Rock? Should Tanner Rock become a middle school, high school potentially to help with its overall capacity? I think there is a lot of ideas out there. I think the solution here today is, whether it's for Point Siena, is there a better solution through leasing and investment than a procurement on the front end? Because as Ms. Usher pointed out, my understanding initially was that some of our high school costs had become exorbitantly high, was due mostly or largely to change orders. What Ms. Usher was able to clarify for me is that was not the case, that it wasn't change orders. It was simply that we significantly underbid the project. Significantly underbid
not
the
an
project
underbid.
based off prior expenses. So at the end of the day, it came in significantly higher than the initial proposed cost for our school district. So there are opportunities before us to look at this, and I think we have to look at concurrency, we have to look at zoning as part of a holistic approach for the whole district.
And I agree with you on all your statements, Mr. Superintendent Hyde. And I have a long list of questions that I'll probably just give to you and the staff.
Yes, ma'am.
But there is one thing that I would say before I yield to someone else. And this is, I believe, I hope so, I'm not sure, if our facilities department has had a chance to review and analyze this proposal and the rationale for their review, if Polk County school students will be in need of such a school facility, and our facilities department, they need to be able to be involved and provide us their analysis of what is being proposed.
Yes, ma'am. There have been several meetings involving not only Ms. Usher, but also involving our chief financial officer, my new chief of staff as well. So there have been multiple people from the district level at the table asking the right questions, asking the same types of questions you're asking now. How is this ultimately beneficial to us so that we can address those questions in a transparent manner? And again, the location of what this might potentially be, even if it's a viable option for us, has yet to be determined. But it is an exciting option, right? It's enticing. The ability for us to leverage our dollars, build schools, lease them out, pay down the debt, and then be able to reallocate funding during the duration of that lease to other schools that are much in need, much to Ms. Usher's point. Can we accelerate some of those timelines? I don't know. I think in fairness, this is why we brought it forward, and I think that's what intrigued almost all of the board, was my understanding, in an interest to at least hear this out. So if you would submit your questions, we would be more than happy. I have shared with the board members questions that we had previously submitted that they provided thorough explanations and rationales behind. And I think at this time, I still need to meet with them and one more time with Ms. Usher to kind of hash out this is what we see, this is what they see. Where's the middle? There has to be a middle in there somewhere for us. So I think there's an opportunity to continue this conversation. Again, you're not voting on anything today, but I'd like to bring this back at the next board meeting and continue this dialogue and make progress towards some solutions for us. But at the same time, I'll bring back an update on concurrency and rezoning as well.
Okay, and some of the questions that I have would be for them, for the company as well.
Beautiful. If you'll
Okay.
send those, we'll make sure we get responses.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
I have one more comment.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Wilson.
I don't want this to be controversial. I think this is an opportunity for us to work together to solve a problem. It's a very real problem. When I first became board chair, I heard the same thing. We acted on what we knew as a school district, and there would be no moratoriums. There was no problem with concurrency. But within a year, maybe less than that, of being board chair, we had a concurrency issue. We were talking moratorium in this county because the builders knew. They saw what was happening. We didn't see that. And I remember many meetings with George Lindsay at the time, who was chair of the Board of County Commissioner, and trying to figure out how to get past that, because that was a real problem for us, just the possibility of a moratorium. Then we passed the absent sales tax. We got past that. And so now the question is, how do we move forward? Look, this is a difficult situation. We're 40% over our original budget on our last high school, whether that's because of change orders or not budgeting correctly or whatever it could be. It is a reality. So I think that our staff are terrific. They've done a wonderful job. Ms. Usher has done a wonderful job. I have no complaints whatsoever, but if we can bring the private sector to the table and they have access to resources we don't have access to, I think I think that's pretty compelling. So I would hope that we could continue talking about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, and then Ms. Reynolds.
Yeah, I agree. I think our staff, Mrs. Usher does the work of many, and we're doing what we can. But as a community person, I saw what was happening that Mr. Wilson just described, and I think, the land we looked at that we have a contract on now with 100 days to do our due diligence, I just do not think that was a good piece of property, and I felt like we had to make a decision based on, our timeline, and if there's an alternative to meet the need, it's only going to be successful if we can work together with a public-private partnership and be collaborative in that. So I'm hoping that we can look at those options to help, both our department and our staff, as well as the students that are coming in that area. My real estate experience is limited with our brokerage being on the other side of the county, but I know for a fact that we are going to be we will be in trouble again. And it's not because we're not planning, we're doing the best we can with the current information. And I want to be able to provide more than that. So I would like for us to continue to look at this option and look at it as an opportunity, an exciting opportunity to work collaboratively to help meet the needs of Polk County, especially in that east area. Thank you.
Ms. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Hyde. Do think that we probably need a school up there sooner rather than later, just seeing portables on softball fields at Haines City High School, that tomorrow would be a great time to open a school. But I just want to echo a little bit of the concurrency issue. I know that we have commissioners on several of our local municipalities that are very interested in renegotiating what our concurrency level is. Because part of it's in state statute, but also part of it can be adjusted based on what the community feels is appropriate. And what was appropriate in 2008, 2009 is probably not appropriate now. So I think the sooner we can get everybody to a table to hash some of that out would be in our best interest. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fields.
The last thing that I'll say about this, back in the day, we had someone on our staff who was an expert on concurrency, Larry Helton. And that position went away a long time ago. And when that position left, I think that's when we started having meetings as Board of County Commissioners and School Board. So I think some of us might have maybe more knowledge than others about concurrency, but that should not be the case. All of us should have the same knowledge. So I don't know how we get it. I don't know where that lies, but I think that that is a very important issue as we're talking about constructing new schools.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Last topic I have in the superintendent's report for the workshop today is another update on COVID. As I promised, I'll continue to provide regular updates. Board members, as you're aware, I send you updated information as it becomes available. The district dashboard was posted and went live last week. Part of the initial delay, we had hoped to have it up by Monday or Tuesday. However, part of the initial delay was ensuring that all of our schools were backfilling information. If you recall, on any given day, they can go backwards 48 hours prior to ensure that they are reporting accurate information. And so you may see data. So for example, families may see data on a Wednesday that reflects a change on Monday's upload. So it won't be reflected in the Wednesday data. It would show a change on the Wednesday for the Monday. So we wanted to also make sure that all of our schools were reporting. And so Mr. McNaughton and the team worked, Dr. Barrios and others worked very diligently, provided supports, provided trainings, provided webinars to ensure that all of our schools were capturing their data. So once we had we had finally 100% of our schools reporting, because that was the other frustration we heard most frequently from stakeholders, was that the data seemed incomplete or inaccurate, and so we worked as aggressively as we could. The dashboard, as you know, is just a reminder, provides both school level and district-wide counts for COVID cases and quarantine events. What I have found is as I search other school districts across the state, we are one of a handful of school districts that report quarantine events. Many of the larger districts do not. They simply report out on COVID positive cases. So here's a snapshot, most recent snapshot of our COVID data dashboard. As you see on the left-hand side, as I shared with you, it shows total confirmed cases to date from that August 23rd date all the way through September 2nd, if I recall correctly. 1,980 total positive cases, 265 of those were employees, 1,715 were students. One of the things to notice, and I hope that I don't jinx this, but you see the decline in reported cases throughout the week last week. It was one of the first weeks across our state where there was an overall decline in COVID positivity rates. The NEMORS data also supported this. I don't typically reference the NEMORS data. I will here in a moment, simply because their sample size is very, very small compared to our total enrollment. So we typically default to both state level data and or local health department data and the data we're collecting here. But you see again on the left-hand side of the screen, we see an overall decline. As we shared with you and as we post on our dashboard, it is expected that following weekends or following holidays, we will see an increase in reporting the immediate day following those, either a holiday weekend or a weekend, simply because we're catching up with case numbers over that time. Again, that is a pattern that you see consistently across other school districts as well. On the COVID data dashboard on the right-hand side, you see the total quarantines per day. As you know, we follow the state guidelines as it relates to quarantine procedures, the duration of a quarantine procedure, and any time that an issue has been brought to our attention, we work to resolve those. One of the things that we have this year that we did not have last year was far more flexibility for students who are unvaccinated to return to school after day 4, so long as they receive a negative COVID test from a CLIA-approved location. You cannot simply do a home test and bring it in. And so again, there you even see, other than the Thursday anomaly, you do see an overall decline in quarantine events throughout last week, which is consistent with a decline in case number because students are being identified as close contacts, potentially either due to a school bus situation and or a classroom situation. At present, when we ran the numbers, we are quarantining an average of 7 students for every positive COVID event. So that's, again, 7 students are being quarantined as a result of being a close contact. That's just the math behind it. On an average, obviously, that number may vary depending on the specifics of a circumstance. So, for example, if a student is both a bus rider and attends class all day, and we find, depending on the school level, that student, he or she alone, having tested positive, could impact upwards of 20 students. So again, this is just an average number of students who are ultimately quarantined based off the total number of positive COVID cases and the total number of quarantine events for last week for students. Again, the trend last week, we did see a downward trend, and again, Nemours and the health department both also reported an overall decline. For the first time in several weeks, the Nemours data, again, very small sample size. I'm going to continue to reiterate that. Less than 200 students on average, if I recall correctly, and reported an overall test positivity rate for those under the age of 12 at 10%. That's the best rate we've seen in the last 3 weeks. We have typically ranged anywhere from 23% to 28% over the last 3 weeks prior to or 3 weeks prior to last week. So here is the Nemours data as I shared. I showed it from last week compared to the week prior. You see overall the total number of tests that were administered. You see here, again, only 96 total students in Polk County captured in the age range. That's why it's a very small sample size and not why typically I refer to the Nemours data, because I don't know that it's representative of our entire community. But out of the 96, we had 10 positive tests, which ultimately equates to a 10% or 10.4% positivity rate amongst all students in the age ranges from 1 to 11. However, that's a 12 percentage point decline from the prior week. So we are seeing some steady improvements there. Again, the hope and the concern that many of us have, let me rephrase that. The concern that many of us have is that after a holiday weekend, will we see a spike? Yes, we will see an increase today at the end of the day, simply because that's the pattern that has traditionally emerged across the state, not only here in Polk County, is that because we're catching up with reporting or issues that are identified over the weekend. But again, you see here, for those age groups, we are seeing a decline. The health department themselves reported an overall decline as well. I am waiting for Dr. Jackson's report. She sends out, and you've seen this spreadsheet before, this graph before. Dr. Jackson does a very good job of informing us of the overall positivity rate. Let me rephrase that. The overall total number of children under the age of 12 who are testing positive for COVID. And again, prior to this last week, we had seen an upward trajectory. The hope would be we see that mirrored, but in her email to all of us on Friday, she indicated that for the first time in over a month, we had seen a significant decline in positivity here in Polk County. So in fairness, a lot of what I try to do with data, because you can use data to tell any story you want. So in fairness, what I did was I went out and compared us to very large districts, since we are in the Big 7 as far as student enrollment, and so I pulled from their dashboards the data that I could. Broward County and Miami-Dade County overwhelmingly had the best data, or excuse me, the most positive data, front-facing data. I can't speak to its accuracy because their numbers were very low, and I don't know why that may be, because those school districts are significantly larger. To have a very, very low number of positive cases was intriguing to me. However, multiple other counties, including those, as you know, that we typically compare ourselves to, had very commensurate results or data along with that mirrored or at least matched what we're seeing here in Polk as far as overall total number of positive cases for students and staff over time. So I show here in this dashboard, you have the counties across the top. You also, I provided a hot link to all of those dashboards, as I'm sure many of you did, maybe potentially over the weekend, as I shared this data with you last week. I'm sure some of you looked at this and you found the same thing I did. I found it intriguing or interesting that many counties don't report their quarantine events. We do, as a matter of transparency. Not that they're not being, they may report it differently in another location, but their COVID dashboard did not have it. So I simply looked at COVID positive cases here and broke it out by students and broke it out by staff. Everybody's dashboard does a good job there. You see the next row below the dashboard link, it actually provides the county-wide vaccination rate at the time I pulled this. The vaccination rate actually here for Polk County, very, very happy to say, has gone up since this last report. I believe we're now at about 61%, if I recall the numbers correctly. So that's exciting to see our vaccination rate increase slowly. But again, you see the total number of cases across the bottom for both students and for staff on a daily basis. Some dates were missing from dashboards. So as far as whether or not their overall total was truly reflective of their number, I can't say for certain. But even, for example, here in Duval County, you see that their number, even with missing cells, that was the weekend, that was the Saturday and Sunday. So some school districts captured that data as we did, and others, you can see there, other school districts did not report any data over the weekend at all. So the only intent behind this is to provide at least some comparisons to other districts to see what trends we're seeing. Hopefully I'll continue to add to this, find a better format for it, because make it more user-friendly. But it's a lot of data to compress into a very small area. And that concludes our COVID summary, with the exception of let me provide a couple additional updates. We have submitted both our ESSER 1 and our ESSER 2 applications to the state. As I shared with you before, that is, and I'm looking to Ms. Jenkins and Mr. Pitts, I believe that is where we are currently allocating $50 million for HVAC enhancements and other utilities. They're called DOA units. Ms. Usher and her team have done a phenomenal job there, as well as Mr. Davis, working with us to ensure that those would provide more fresh air, turn over their air refresh rate in our buildings much more quickly. Ms. Usher's team met with the developer and who designed those fully integrated UV filtration systems that I shared before will drop into a ceiling grid. The company was supposed to contact us and install one as a pilot in one of our classrooms, just to show us the ease in which it's installed, how it operates, those types of things. Then based off that, Ms. Usher and her team would come back and make a recommendation for those. We have put a halt right now on the use of ozone after hours. Ozone has been proven to address COVID bacteria or viruses, excuse me. The problem is it cannot be done when there's occupants within the building. Ms. Usher was doing her due diligence, reached out to those at the state level. They expressed some concerns, so I asked for the contact information for our air quality control group that we typically will contract anytime there's a complaint about air quality within a school building or a district office, for example, mold, mildew. They assist us with mitigation efforts, to talk to them to see what their response is as well. Because again, having researched this and utilized this previously, our insurer and everyone else was okay with it, again, so long as it's done after hours when the building's unoccupied. It allows us to turn over the classroom at a much faster rate and ensure that we've addressed the virus that may have been left behind in a classroom where we know we had a confirmed case. We did initially receive very quickly, thank you to Ms. Usher and to the team and to Mr. Bridges for helping us accelerate some of our emergency procurements. I was really excited to learn last week that pallets of all of our trifolds for the elementary level had showed up. And then as Ms. Usher's team began unpacking them to do distribution, we realized they had shipped us the wrong item. So we had to repackage them and ship them back. So we expect to receive delivery of those plexiglass trifolds for each individual student elementary desk relatively shortly, and I'll provide an update as to that timeline. But it is important that we highlight all the additional mitigation efforts that we're utilizing to the greatest extent possible. Kudos again to Ms. Usher and her team, because as you know, not only do we have continued to address staffing shortages, you heard Ms. Freed talk about staffing shortages in our VPK programs and our Head Start programs, but we also continue to face challenges in our custodial services. And so our ability to ensure that our classrooms are cleaned and well-maintained has been challenging, especially in the midst of COVID and having to address those classrooms and those common areas. But Ms. Usher was able to go out and continue to contract and expand upon our contract with a current company we are already utilizing. And so anytime we have an event, she and her team are able to notify them so that they can be deployed to assist us with cleaning in those facilities as well. And I know that the board has received concerns about that. We wanted to be as responsive as possible, but I wanted to give Ms. Usher and her team the credit for having worked on that as quickly as possible. So those are just a few updates. And so at this time, I'll turn it over to any questions or comments. Ms. Fortney.
We still have air purifiers that need to be distributed to common areas, large areas, media centers, cafeterias,
So
some art rooms.
So all of our classrooms received air purifiers. Those common areas were secondary. So as what the regionals were requested to do was first and foremost identify any classroom space that did not receive it. And what we found was at times we had sent them out to the schools. They were placed where they should have been placed, and then they were subsequently relocated. And so Ms. Usher's team has developed a comprehensive list. I'm looking over at Ms. Usher. Have we ordered the additional devices for the schools that had missing devices from classrooms and other areas?
Yes, we have ordered for the other common areas like the cafeteria, resource room, media room. We have ordered for all schools, but they're kind of behind, so we won't get those until mid-October. But we have at least 1,700 more coming for those spaces.
Right. So all art rooms should have them, Mr. Hyde, correct?
All classroom spaces should have them, yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'll
Now,
find
this
out.
is also where this newer device may be a better solution for those classrooms to drop them into the ceiling grids because they are not currently on back order. And so if we find that they are truly sufficient and do what their research shows that they can do, that may become a much faster option for us to deploy.
I'll let you know as far as individuals.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And I believe I saw Mr. Wilson.
I have some comments, and Ms. Fields, would it be okay if I share some comments now about this issue, or would you like me to wait until we do our comments after we go over the agenda?
Comments concerning the COVID update?
Yes, ma'am.
You can do it now.
Okay, thank you. So, school districts, school boards throughout the country are tasked with the virtually impossible assignment, and that is providing the best possible education while simultaneously trying to keep students and staff safe from a virus that is relentless. And, oftentimes I get the feeling, it feels like we're an island in the middle of a raging war and getting very little help, it seems, from the folks we should be getting help from. But there are those folks who are adamant that we need a mask mandate. And I get the research and I get the data from them, and they're right. Their data and their research is good and it's valid and it's true and it's right. And then I hear from the folks on the other side saying we don't need a mask mandate, and they provide their data and their research, and it's right. So how can we have two groups that are right on opposite sides of this issue? And the answer is the truth almost always lies in the middle, rarely on the extremes. When we started down this path, I was one of the most adamant and most vocal individuals as relates to mask mandates. But as we got to the end of last year and we looked at the data from around the state, we didn't see those school districts that required mask mandates having better outcomes than those that didn't. And there were a lot of folks who said, you can't count on that. It's disparate information, it's not standardized, it's not consistent. So for the past couple weeks, on a daily basis, I've been going to the websites around the state and looking at their data. And most of them have COVID dashboards. And I've been looking at that data on a relative basis. You can't just take their raw data because some districts are bigger than others. You have to compare it to their populations. But I'm looking at that data on a relative basis, and I see no difference. I see no difference in those school districts that have mask mandates than those that don't. Now, there is one, and Mr. Hyde pointed it out, that has an exceptionally low rate. It's off the charts low. But there's also one school district that has a mask mandate that has, whose rates are off the charts high. I mean, just phenomenally high. So, but the vast majority, as I've looked at these websites, are pretty consistent. And I'm not saying I don't believe in masks. I believe in masks. We're just not seeing that those districts with mandates are having better outcomes than those districts that don't. So it begs the question, why not? I mean, I think if we get to that point, then we can solve the bigger issue of why isn't that the case? And we can start addressing the real core issue, I think. You know, one of the clear mitigation strategies that works has to do with filtration and ventilation, and Mr. Hyde just talked about that for a few minutes. I'm going to ask him to elaborate just a little bit more, if you would, and where we are with those. But in addition to that, last year, we had a virtual option. And I think everyone agrees that the fewer people we have in a room, the fewer instances of COVID infections you have. This year, we don't have that option. So we should have a virtual option for those parents who want a virtual option. And what that will do, among other things, it will mean we have fewer students in the classroom, and that's going to help. I mean, it did last year, and it will again this year. So I've asked Mr. Bridges and I've asked Mr. Hyde about exploring a virtual option. I know the state says we can't do that, but I think we should do that at least on a temporary basis. And so I've asked them to look into that and see if there are any options for us. I have no problem with saying to the state, look, we have a very serious matter here, and if we can offer a virtual option and have fewer students in a classroom, have those students parents who want their children in a virtual program, at least temporarily, give them that option. I think that's a mitigation strategy that, when you look at the list of things as it relates to mitigation strategies, those are far higher on the list than masks are. So I would hope we could look into that and perhaps come up with a solution, because I'm all for doing that. So thank you, Madam Vice Chair and Mr. Hyde. And I know you talked a little bit about ventilation and filtration. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
So I'll bring Ms. Usher up, because she and her team were the ones that brought this to me. So first and foremost, they're called DOA units. We have them at a handful of our sites. In fact, I saw one, if I recall correctly, they were part of a recent refurbishment that occurred at one of our high schools, one of our middle highs, Fort Meade. And so what it does is it ensures some of our air conditioning units, much like your car, you can click on a recirculation button, which means you're not getting much fresh air. You're just recirculating and cooling existing air. Many of our air conditioning systems function in that capacity, our older systems. And so what the DOA unit does is it draws in fresh air, and jump in at any time, pre-cools it down to about 72 degrees so that it doesn't infuse just hot air into the classroom and impact our overall energy consumption and or impact our temperature regulation within the classroom. But it turns over the air. So essentially, we'd have to do the air quality study based off the room size, based off the DOA unit size, and they would be scaled appropriately for the facility to ensure that the air refresh rate was occurring far more frequently. If any of you have flown recently, a lot of the airlines, for example, will advertise that they refresh the air in the cabin every 7 minutes. And that's important, because especially with an airborne virus, you want to have that fresh air coming in and circulation occurring. So that's one of the strategies, and so if approved, we have already had a first review and approval on our submission. We're waiting on a second review approval. If approved, then the team will go out and begin procurement and contracting for those devices. It will take us some time to install all of those devices, and again, just the sad reality right now with COVID, as Ms. Usher, I think the example she provided a few moments ago of the air purifiers for classrooms being delayed till October, that's not because we're delayed in our procurement process, but we're competing for those devices along with every other school district across the nation for those types of devices. And so we'll have to be reliant upon the manufacturers and our ability to move quickly for installation. But there's some engineering that has to take place. But Her team is already moving on those things. So Ms. Usher, did you want to expand any further upon what I've shared?
The doors is a dedicated outdoor air system. It's standalone from the AC. It brings the air in, and besides keeping it clean, it also helps in preventing mold and keeping a safe, healthy classroom. And talking to staff, this is something not just with COVID, but something that will always help the classroom. So
Yeah.
that is our biggest recommendation, to have that done. It's costly, but I think it's a
Yeah, we don't
good
know how
product
many
to have.
variants are coming along behind this one, besides which it will help with flus in general for future
Correct.
years,
That's
right?
correct, right.
Correct.
And
That's correct.
what percentage of the purifiers do we have in classrooms? Do we know? Like, are we like 50% of those?
No, we have, altogether, we have like 7,100 purifiers. Every classroom has a purifier
At this time?
at this time.
Okay, that's relevant. So every classroom has a purifier at this time. Thank you for
Right.
that.
So the other area that Ms. Fortney was asking about was like the library and the cafeteria,
Okay.
and those will be coming mid-October.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think it's important the public know that we have, at least we have the purifiers in every classroom, and I know that should help significantly based on the mitigation strategy reports and research that I've seen.
You mentioned, Mr. Wilson, if I may, the question about the remote option, and as you indicated, the state of Florida unfortunately did not renew remote learning as an option for families. And I've had this conversation with the department that, in fairness, if we're truly about affording parents choice, then we should offer choices on multiple topics and not just about masking. That remote learning, if masks are not going to be implemented or cannot be implemented, to afford families a choice, then we should be offering families who don't feel comfortable being in person the choice of being remote. It then becomes a logistical issue for us to resolve. As you know, we currently have approximately 104 vacancies. Kudos to the HR team for having filled 50 within the last week alone. So they've done a great job. They continue to hire, interview, and place staff. We will be going through 15-day recalculation. That's the process that occurs every year, where we identify schools that may be overstaffed, and those staff can be reassigned. On a typical year, you may see anywhere, and I'm looking out to the audience to see if Ms. Porteous is here, just so I don't misspeak, but I believe anywhere from 15 to 30 staff can be reassigned in any given year. So part of those 104 vacancies may be filled with existing staff that are currently in our system through the reassignment process, and that will occur starting this week and next week. I'll provide further updates there. So logistically, outside of staffing becomes a potential barrier to remote instruction. If we were to use existing staff, the recommendation from my office would be that we have fully dedicated staff to remote instruction. What that would mean reassigning and rescheduling a large number of students. That's not completely impossible. It's easier to do at the secondary level than it is at elementary. Elementary in particular, one of the concerns that's most often expressed when you reschedule after the first few weeks of school is that my child's built a relationship with this teacher, and now you're reassigning him or her. But part of this too will be based off whether, if we were to move in that direction, would be based off of an interest of the staff member. You know, maybe they have an issue that may not necessarily qualify them for an ADA exemption or for some type of modification to work from home. However, they may be close, and we may find they're better suited to work in a remote environment. So that's an option. Another option to address offering true remote instruction and not just a daily login where they're actually engaging with a teacher each day is there are, because of COVID, there are countless companies that have grown as a result of COVID that we could look to that they currently have staffing, and they could provide daily instruction if that was our interest. But just so we're understanding, because it's not supported by the state at this time, we'd have to appeal and ask for an exemption or some type of permission to pilot it potentially as a school district. Then in the absence of that, potentially they could withhold funding for the students who are enrolled who would be participating remotely. So it's just something for us to be aware of. But again, I agree with you. I think we're in the worst of possible situations with the most limited toolbox available to us at this time. So, Ms. Miller and then Ms. Fields.
Thank you. I do appreciate the data that we're collecting. This makes it easier, especially if you're going to make a case to the DOE that we have a need for an alternative learning, e-learning. I I just clicked on the dashboard because it's easier for me to open up that email. And as, 11:30 last night, when it crosses over from what's gone on over the weekend, we've passed the 2,000 mark, but I see an increase in employees, which brings me to my biggest concern. With staffing, I'm hearing from schools that, students, because of shortage of teachers who are out for COVID, or it could be other reasons, but mainly because of the increase in quarantines for staff, we're grouping people in auditoriums, we're grouping them in different larger buildings to be able to accommodate them before, we can get a teacher involved if we can the entire day. So I have a couple of questions. One, the principals are responsible for reporting these quarantine numbers. And at one point, we were still encouraging them to do that. Is it the regionals following up to make sure we're getting true data numbers from them?
Yes, so point of clarification, each school has a COVID liaison. It's not necessarily the building principal who enters the data. That COVID liaison could be anyone from a school nurse to assistant principal or the principal. Depends on the size of the school, it could be a dean. So yes, each school has a COVID liaison who's responsible. If the data is not reported in a timely manner, that's exactly what takes place. Mr. McNaughton and Dr. Barrios provide an update, and then we follow up with those schools through their regionals to ensure that they're reporting in a timely manner. To your initial opening remark, we were made aware of a handful of situations where our high schools in particular, because of shortages of staff, were placing students in large congregate settings. However, that issue, my understanding, was largely resolved and eliminated as of last week when we became aware of that. So the team has come together. We've identified an entire list of district staff who have the appropriate certifications. And every morning, as the need arises, schools contact their regionals, and we assign staff to backfill those positions. The hope would be, as we've seen quarantine and case positivity decline over last week, we should see larger numbers of our employees returning to work because we afford them the same quarantine exemptions as we do our students at this time. So they should have reduced durations for quarantine, just like our students do, so long as they are not symptomatic and can have a negative test if they're unvaccinated. If they're vaccinated, and so long as they have no symptoms, they may continue to work.
Can we get a report of, we see the absences for students, but is there any way to get, at least to the board, to understand how many staff are that we have in quarantine?
You have the staff quarantine numbers here for employees in green.
But is it current numbers as of today, or
These are daily numbers that are entered each day. So if you wanted a total number of employees, as of right now, 344 is what we would have going back to August 24th. We could pull the attendance codes as we did previously for students and identify the total number of employees prior to August 24th for the 2 weeks prior to that we were open.
And are these all employees or just teachers?
These would be all employees.
So this could affect
Dr.
bus driver
Mr.
maintenance?
McNaughton, is it all employees or instructional school-based staff only? School-based staff.
School-based staff only, okay. That's all. I have a couple of questions about the dashboard that I'll send you. My
Yes, ma'am.
biggest concern is the quarantine numbers. I think Ms. Fields mentioned it earlier. I think the average absence is, what does it say our average absent is? 8,867 students absent. And that's, roughly 10% if we're at 100,000. That's really rough numbers. And I am concerned about assessments. I'm concerned about these students falling behind. And I know we're looking at that as a district, but I would like to expand on that about what it's going to look like by the end of the year if we're going to. And I know we don't have much say in what the DOE does, but we have to make sure our data is good so the community understands what it will look like for students who've been out and they could be quarantined multiple times. It will affect their learning. It will affect what they're retaining for assessments, and I think that's a concern for the district.
Well, admittedly, it is a concern. I'd need to hear an alternative. If the recommendation is we not adhere to the state guidelines for quarantine periods and who gets quarantined and for what duration, I'll take direction from the board, but I'll openly say I struggle with that. I completely understand the impact that it has on families. My own son we've been contacted twice for my son to be quarantined. He hasn't had to because he's vaccinated. So for those under the age of 12, my sympathy and my heart truly goes out to them. But to not follow the quarantine protocol subsequently may result in an increase in school-level transmission and
No,
a
I
number
apo-
of positive cases.
I apologize if that's what it sounded like. I'm not suggesting we don't follow quarantine protocol. If we can use this data for an e-learning option, or at least to recognize that this will make an impact on the outcome at the end of the year, it will definitely make an impact, especially in the elementary school. My 10-year-old's been quarantined. I understand what it looks like to lose that time in the classroom, and we will see that at the end in their test results.
Correct. Ms. Fields, I believe your hand was up too.
I've said what Ms. Miller has said from the very beginning. And I've talked to you personally about my concern with the kids quarantining and not getting the quality of education that they deserve to have. And the ones that would be impacted the most look just like me, according to the data that we have. They already are behind, so they're getting further behind. Some of the students have an opportunity to have parents that are at home with them still, but a lot of our families, they're back at work. I made a statement at the last board meeting, and my opinion on that has not changed. I would like to know, everybody have their own opinion about why we need masks and why we don't need masks. But we have yet to have any medical experts to come to a meeting and talk to us and tell us what the real deal is. We're in a public health crisis. I think everybody in this room knows that. I think we need to have someone to come in and to talk to us and to tell us exactly, what that looks like and what are some mitigations that we can impose. I'm looking at the information I think it was Miami and what was that first column?
Broward.
Broward. I mean, what are they doing? They're doing something amazing if you look at their data compared to others. Is it something that they're doing that we might not be doing that we could do? I don't know. I have no earthly idea. All I know is from the very beginning, before school started, after school started, I have asked for an emergency meeting 3 times. And every time I've basically been told that I'm the only one that wants an emergency meeting. I don't understand why we don't value the importance of having conversation like we're having now. Mr. Wilson had a very nice comment, very good stuff. He's talking about the data. I haven't seen the data. But that's where we can sit down and have conversation and then come to an agreement that either we are or we aren't. If we're going to vote it up or vote it down, do we want to mandate masks for 30 days? Yes or no, vote it down, but put it on record. We have employees that are afraid. We have students that are afraid. We have families who are being infected by their kids coming back home. Not on purpose. They don't mean to come and bring anything, but they're bringing it back home. And then it's impacting our whole community. And so my question is, when are we going to have someone to come that is a medical expert and give us the information, and then we decide what we want to do with it?
So just a point of reference, we did bring the health department in for that very reason 2 meetings ago, and they shared a narrative, a counter narrative to the non-masking. And in our conversations with the health department, part of the concerns with masking is the masking behavior, if it's not going to extend outside of the school day, that the concern is that it won't have a negligible impact on the overall number of cases. Because again, if it's only being done in school, the spread, by and large, the spread is not happening on our campuses. So we only have, and we have limited data, and evidence
I don't
of
believe that
actual
data.
transmission events, and I've highlighted those for the board previously. Spencer Holland was one. We had a middle school where there was one. And then we had a bus situation where we knew of 2 routes that ran that impacted 7 students, and we believe that there was transmission amongst them. Those are the issues we know of. There's a lot we don't know, admittedly, and as well as other school districts are struggling with the same things. I'd be more than happy to put back together and ask the health department to come at our next meeting or to provide another update for the board, a written summary of their recommendations. I'd be more than happy to have that put together. I had spoken with the health department previously about putting together a consortium of local health experts to have regular meetings to start talking about any additional mitigation efforts that we could do. We are adhering, and many of the things you've heard me highlight as far as the things we're implementing exceed those of the CDC recommendation outside of mask wearing. So we are there. We have brought them in. I'd be more than happy to bring them in again. As a matter of fact, I'll make a call and see if they can come tonight.
No disrespect, Superintendent Hyde, but when we were in this same situation last year, but not as severe, it was more than Dr. Jackson that came. There were people from other, Nemora
Sure.
Hospital and others that came.
Yes, ma'am.
And they all had their own point of view, and that's all that I'm saying.
Absolutely. I can work to make that happen before the next meeting.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Reynolds?
Thank you. You mentioned not seeing much transmission on our campuses other than the few outbreaks you listed. Do we have the data of the number of students that are testing positive when they're trying to test out of quarantine, or have tested positive once they've been in quarantine?
We do not. So that's one of the questions one of your fellow board members asked, and that's something we're going to have to drill into to make a determination. So the only way we may be able to ascertain that is looking at the attendance code, and if a student were to exceed their anticipated duration of absenteeism, that may be a reflection that they tested positive. And I'll have to work with the team to figure out how can we get that data, because even when the health department reports information to us, it's very limited for obvious reasons, legal reasons, so they don't always disclose the who, other than sometimes they just disclose the total count. At times we've received a total count and it's nowhere near reflective of, so the health department, as I shared previously, Dr. Jackson gives us a total number of children under the age of 12 who are testing positive. There was a week where that number was 600, and yet nowhere in our school level data, including that coming from the health department, were we even close to that number. And so it raises a lot of questions, knowing that we support close to 70% of our students enrolled here in Polk County. We should see 70% or more of those students, that number reflected in our case numbers. We weren't seeing that, and that's again one of the reasons why we invested in Metasource to help us with our contact tracing, and also the investment in developing our own dashboard so we can better monitor on a regular basis our data. We can have that conversation to see how we can drill down in the data. I think Ms. Fields raised a good question earlier. To what extent can we drill down and make this filterable based off of other demographic information, male, female, race, ethnicity, language? There may be some powerful trends that we see. There might be some powerful data that we reveal as a result. And then we'll have to see what we can do to determine if a student was sent home quarantined, what percentage of those students ultimately test positive versus not. And I know that's a question the board's had for some time. As recent as as early as June when I arrived, that was a question the board was asking, but no one's been able to track that data to date.
Thank you. And I just think it's important that, if we see 100 kids are quarantined and 100 kids test negative on day 4, then I think we do need to reevaluate our quarantine process. I don't know that that's what we're going to see, but I think it's important to make sure that we're looking at it from that aspect. If no student is testing positive, then are we really serving students best to quarantine them for 4 days and have them out of school? But if we're seeing students that are testing positive, then we probably should continue that practice. But I just want to make sure that we're not keeping kids out of school unnecessarily as often as possible.
And we're exploring every option when it comes to testing as well. We've expanded our clinics, to make sure that people can have ready access, because more and more home kits are also becoming difficult to find in some areas. And so we have expanded that. We have, I asked Metasource to put together a proposal for staff testing based off the size of our school district and their availability of staff. What would weekly testing look like? Or would it be something that, because of our size, we could only do every other week? And we also said it would be voluntary, so I sent them by school the total number of staff, all staff inclusive, so that they could, and I gave them an estimate based off 60% participation, 70%, 80%, 90%, because it's very rare that you're going to get 100% participation in a voluntary testing environment. And so based off that, they have sent me some estimates. And it's roughly $175,000 per week to test all of our campuses. Now, there are ESSER dollars available for that, and that's something I plan on bringing back to the board on the 27th as a topic of discussion. It would be voluntary, and it's something I have to discuss further with PEA as well. So, yes, ma'am.
Is there somewhere that our teachers or staff can go to get immediate test results? They wake up Tuesday morning not feeling good, stay out for the day, but would like to come back on Wednesday?
I would love to say immediate, yes. Our clinics right now take appointments each day, and they schedule as many as possible. I'd have to talk to Ms. King to get a number that maybe potentially get turned away each day to see what expanding that opportunity might look like. But there are other CLIA-approved testing centers that use the rapid tests, and we continue to provide that list to our employees. But I'm sure that there are people who are being turned away depending on the circumstances.
Because even if they're, I don't know if it's possible for us to establish a couple of pop-up drive-through sites throughout maybe on some of our high school campuses or something like that. But
Yeah.
I've had a couple teachers now contact me saying, okay, I had to stay home 3 days, but I ended up negative, but it took me 3 days to be able to get a test. So
That
that's
ultimately
3 days
may-
that we had a healthy teacher that couldn't be in front of kids.
That ultimately may be where we land with Metasource as a final recommendation to the board from my office, is that we identify 5 sites each week, 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. That would be for staff only, and then identify those same sites 2 days a week for parents, so that they could bring their children through and have them tested, both as a reassurance and to ensure that they can have timely access back to school after day 4.
Thank you.
So I think that's a good middle ground for us to explore. And if we have to expand those sites, then that would be something based off demand we might be able to do, but that's going to require further conversation with the team to
Thank you.
address that. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fortney.
Everybody knows where I stand on this, and I have shared with you all of these things in private, so I'm not going to say anything else. I'm done.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fields.
The dashboard, is the district office staff on the dashboard?
No, ma'am. I believe this is schools only. I don't
Are we
believe
going
put
to include the
offices.
district office staff on the dashboard?
We can certainly do so. I see heads nodding.
Excuse me?
Yes, ma'am. We can certainly do so. I see heads
I think
nodding.
we should. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. That concludes, Ms. Miller, sorry.
Sorry, real quick. I agree that the information that Mr. Reynolds suggested would help a lot in planning because of how many staff that we have out. But can you talk a little bit about, have we only had 2 schools that have had accelerated mitigation? And can you talk about what the quota is to be met before that goes into an accelerated mitigation process?
Yeah, so the first was at Spessor Holland Elementary School. It was just prior to the start of school, and we had identified 5 or more linked cases where we believe that there, according to Health Department and their contact tracing, that there was evidence of transmission. So based off that, we were proactive, as you know, because it was prior to the start of school. We were able to close the school for 2 days, do a deep clean, and we brought in testing, and we mandated masks for a 2-week period of time, and that subsequently addressed, by and large, any issues moving forward. The second one was at the middle school. I was looking for Mr. Hill.
It was my
and-
middle school.
Yes, ma'am.
Stanbaugh.
Stanbaugh, thank you. And that was based off the totality of both student and staff cases. We had, at the time, as I shared the data with the board, there were approximately 12 staff members who had all been quarantined. Either they were in the process of being tested, they had been tested and been negative, or they were quarantined and returning. All of those at the time were returning by Wednesday of that week. However, to your earlier comment and question or point, at some point, that still impacts their ability to support instruction each day. And then that, coupled with the number of students that were being quarantined, it was concerning enough to me that as superintendent, because I have that authority, that I imposed masks for those staff for the 2-week period of time, and we continued offering voluntary testing there. It was voluntary at that school because we did not have evidence of transmission or an outbreak as we defined it. It was simply because of the case volume at that time. But it's my understanding subsequently that that issue also has been largely addressed moving forward.
Thank you.
Oh, I apologize. There was one error, omission that was made earlier, and I've been reminded. I'd like to bring Ms. Porteous forward on the topic of the HR. There was an attachment that was inadvertently left off, and it has been added for the board.
Good afternoon. I'll be really quick. We are revising the job description for the equity analyst. Essentially, we are aligning it to its actual practices. As you look at the job description, particularly in the essential job functions, you'll see that we just updated it to make sure that it actually aligns with what the position does. This is a no-cost change.
Which item is that, Ms. Tedger?
I'm sorry?
Which item is that?
Which
It was
item is
item 5.
Okay.
Organizational chart changes. What you see now is there's a second attachment in there, analyst equity and compliance strike-through PDF.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Are there any questions, Ms. Fields? Okay, that concludes
Thank
the
you.
discussion items for today.
And what about information?
Information items, the grants report? Who's presenting that?
And
I do not have that. I do not have that, Ms. Fields, I apologize.
excuse me?
I do not have that, the grants report.
Okay.
I asked who's here to present.
It's just an information item. Right?
Correct.
All right, so thank you, Superintendent Hyde.
Yes, ma'am.
We're going to take a break. We don't have discipline today, do we? No
Pardon me?
discipline today, right?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so I would say, excuse me? No, I need to use the bathroom. I didn't know. It's okay. So if we could take a 10-minute break, please?
Yes, ma'am. We'll return at 3:52.
Yes.
Thank you.
Working for Polk County Public Schools as a bus driver or bus attendant is just a small yet important part of what we do to serve our students. We want to thank all the unsung heroes of our driving force. Our dedicated trainers assist every day with educating new drivers and bus attendants, preparing them to be the best they can be. Trainers shine in assisting new hires to become safe and efficient drivers, and they teach bus attendants the essentials of their daily responsibilities. It's more than a job. Our CPR trainers and instructors teach life-saving skills, keeping everyone's certification up to date with continual training. Trainers help with CDL licensing, making sure candidates know the ins and outs of a bus, preparing them to take and pass the commercial driver's license test. Putting our students' safety first is always our top priority. The transportation team thanks everyone for their hard work and the dedication that they give to make sure the job is done. The training department would not be where we are today if it wasn't for the devotion of our trainers. If you are a dedicated, responsible, respectful, patient person with a positive attitude and a desire to help others succeed, then you are exactly who we are looking for in a trainer. Please contact the training department if you are interested in making a positive difference in someone's life.
All right, we are now back in session. And we have quite a few board recognitions tonight, special recognitions tonight, rather. And after we have recognitions, we'll do the public comments on agenda items. And I'm not aware of any one that has signed up for that. And then we go to the approval of the minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes to be approved. And then next, we go to the approval of the consent agenda. And we have new administrators. Superintendent Hyde. Superintendent Hyde, we do have new administrators.
2?
Ms. Fields?
I assume yes.
Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry, I thought I heard you heard me. 2, I apologize.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
And then Ms. Reynolds has a question for you.
I just wanted to make sure that we're going to allow the new administrators to speak and recognize their families if they wish to.
If they wish to, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I had asked Superintendent Hyde about making sure that we go back to that practice.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we'll go to the business services. We have items 1 through 6. Does anybody have any questions on any of those items? And we have nothing on the deputy superintendent, nothing on the facilities. Now we'll go to human resources. We have 1 through 4. Any questions on any of those items? Nothing on the information. Oh, Mr. Wilson, yes.
Madam Vice Chair, I apologize, but we, as is typical, we have a couple of items that are over the $1 million threshold, H4, H5, and H6. And, you know, I think just as a matter of transparency, when we have something that is of a significant dollar value, even if it's recurring, that we should provide just a very brief explanation.
We are prepared to do,
Thank
we are
you.
prepared to do so this evening.
Thank you.
Is it easier just to have those items on the regular agenda, just to not have to go through this every time?
Well, the hope would be that we would address this topic as part of the workshop, so I didn't want to just assume to make that a new practice, but yes, ma'am, we could easily do that.
Well, I think even if you do as part of the regular agenda, it's not going to change anything. I'm still going to ask for the explanation. But if you do it as part of a workshop, have we seen these items in a workshop?
No, sir.
Yeah, so if we do it as part of a workshop, I think that takes care of it as well.
Okay, so
you know,
so then Superintendent
I
Hyde would just
will
know that those items would need to.
Yes, ma'am, we can include that in my presentation.
I mean, I would offer that to spend just 30 seconds discussing it here would be a lot less time consuming even than a workshop. But whatever you want to do is fine with me. I think we just have a responsibility to the general public when we're talking about high dollar value items or high dollar items to give them some background about what's happening.
All right, so we don't have anything on the information technology, regional student services. We have 2 items. Does anybody have any questions on those items? Then we go to support services. We have 1 item there. And now we go to teaching and learning, 1 item there.
Is that 01?
That's the uniform assessment calendar.
That's what I wanted to ask about.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. That uniform assessment calendar, I know we have to provide to the state, but when you look at it, it's 10 pages long of tiny print. And, on top of a pandemic, our kids are still being assessed at a huge rate of speed. And, It's on the consent agenda, so I will have to vote for the consent agenda, but just my own experience in the classroom, test and punish does not work. And testing's fine. The punishment piece is what I disagree with. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention if they want to look at it. 10 pages long.
And I agree with you, Ms. Fortney, but it used to be a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah, Ms. Phil, I just want to, I mean, I appreciate the conversation, but I'm speaking as a parent, I think the assessment is critical. And, Ms. Fortney, I appreciate the note that coming from a teacher, the testing side, but I think the use of the word punish, I would probably contest the use of that word. We have 3 kids, and we appreciate that dialogue with all 3 of our kids as we look at the outcome of their star ratings, we see the progression, we look at their FSAs. So, and I'm just speaking more as a parent in regards to that. So, just my thoughts. Thank you.
I get that, Dr. Allen. And I'm not talking about the evaluation piece. I'm talking about what's done with the data in the state level. That's what I'm talking about. And it does become a punishment for our instructors and in the long run, our administrators. So, but I understand what you mean with the evaluation piece. That's not the point that I'm trying to make, but thank you.
And then there's a point of celebratory as well. As we look at, if we go back to our last meeting at the very beginning, the opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments as well from a testing standpoint and the great work that we've been doing in the district.
One of the things that was discussed today as a part of the legislative platform was just making sure that we are very mindful of that we are in a pandemic and that we need to be graceful and make sure that our kids have an equal footing, as well as that our staff are given the grace and the support that they need, in my opinion. All right, the next item would be the regular item agenda. Boone Middle School, naming of the band building for Sharice Harris, and who's going to do that? Whose district is that in? Ms. Cunningham? So hopefully Ms. Cunningham will be here in order to do that. And if not, who would like to?
Ms. Cunningham will not be in attendance this evening.
Excuse me?
Ms. Cunningham will not be in attendance this evening.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. So, Ms. Fortney, can you do that, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Whatever you're asking me. Yes. Sorry.
And then the 2020-2021 annual financial report, I assume that Ms. Wright would do that? Ms. Wright will present that?
Ms. Wright, Ms. Jenkins,
Jenkins, I don't know why I want to call her Ms. Wright, Ms. Jenkins.
Ms.
Yes.
Jenkins and Mr. Pitts will both as needed.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
And then we go into our public hearing. We have 2 items. We have the final budget and the millage rates approval for the year, and then we have policy updates. And I have not had a chance to really look at this because I wasn't aware that I was doing the meeting. But we will have quite a few motions to adopt quite a few things, so we just have to work through it, as we always do. Does anybody have any questions on that? Any board members? All right, and then after we finish with that, we'll hear from our superintendent, and then we'll hear from our school board attorney, and I don't believe we have an auditor's report, and then we'll go into our board members' reports, and after that, we will have public comments addressing items not on today's agenda. And then after that, the meeting will be adjourned. So now that we've done that, we'll go to The board members? Is there any old business? I'm not aware of any. I'm not aware of any new business. And any board members that would like to have comments at this time? Ms. Fortney, would you like to have anything?
I'm going to save all mine for the board meeting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Reynolds?
I'm good for now, thank you.
Ms. Miller?
No comments, thank you.
Dr. Allen?
No comments, thank you.
Mr. Wilson?
No comments, thank you.
All right, so that means that we're done. And we will be back at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.